He opened his eyes in a cradle, wearing a crown. Reincarnated as the emperor from birth, he's surrounded by scheming nobles, power-hungry generals, and a world that will crush the weak without mercy. Now, with the mind of his past life and the authority of an empire, he must grow up fast. Because in this palace, every smile hides a dagger. Can the youngest emperor survive long enough to rule? Let's find out. This story begins with the protagonist, Carmine de la Bungarth, wondering what people think about reincarnation in another world, about adventures in a new mystical world with your cheating abilities, or maybe there you can gather a harem of beautiful girls and enjoy the life of a real man. His thoughts were interrupted by his assistant. He asked him if his master was sure. The protagonist answered him that it was so, and returned to his thoughts. Or do people think that if they defeat the Demon King, they will become the saviors of the whole world? It sounded cool, of course. He thought so too. But the reality turned out to be completely different. He ended up in this world as a puppet. This is his story about how he became an emperor. One day, in the Bungarth Empire, a loud cry of a child was heard in the castle, into which the protagonist was reborn. He saw strange ceilings with bewilderment, and thought, what is happening? Where is he? Anyway, there were two people leaning over him, speaking in a language the protagonist did not understand. He was surprised. Who were they? And what were they saying? And who was screaming so loudly? His head was splitting from all that screaming. Couldn't these people standing over him shut this screamer's mouth? Suddenly it dawned on him that it was none other than himself who was screaming so much. He didn't know if it was because his mental body was not quite in tune with his physical one. But the following days passed for him as if someone had put a movie on fast forward. Gradually, the outlines and colors became clearer, and the understanding of the language passed. In addition, he also came to understand his existence in this new world, and it was a very strange feeling. After a while, he noticed that the room he was lying in was decorated in a Western style. It was not like the modern world. He had different mothers every day. Or were they not mothers at all? Most likely, it was the nannies who treated him with love. This word they constantly say when they pick him up, is it his name? Or is it his social status? And also, he felt something in the air that he had never felt before. What was it? And so several months passed. One day he woke up, realized that he was alone, and cried loudly. In general, he cried a lot for no reason. Apparently, this was a feature of his age. The nanny immediately ran to him and picked him up. She handed him toys and sat him on the floor to play. He thought, this is what it means to be reborn. The main character looked at the toy and thought he imagined it differently. Shouldn't he have been thrown somewhere to a god who would give him cheating abilities? Nothing like that happened. Maybe it was all because of karma? First of all, he did not even remember how he died in his past life. And in general, the memories of his past life are vague. He remembered the faces of his parents and the rest of his family, but he couldn't remember their names and his own name too. He didn't trust people, so in his past life, he didn't really have any friends. The protagonist felt tears running down his face, which wasn't surprising since his new body was always crying. The nanny immediately ran up to him and grabbed him in her arms. He thought that the emotional swings were only getting worse, but he couldn't do anything about it yet. And if so, then he should at least try to understand the situation as best he could. First of all, his name is Carmine de la Bungarth, a very long name, and he's supposedly the emperor of this empire. A newborn child became the emperor, so one can assume that the situation in the country is not very good. In fact, there were two people in power now. They were Chancellor Karl de van Raoul and Master of Ceremonies Philippe de Garde Akikar. Apparently, they are both dukes in whom the blood of the royal family flows, and apparently the empire is now torn apart by their struggle for power. At all times, people in power are always fighting, but he did not like it. But is it normal to make a child an emperor? Although something similar has already happened in history. Yes, that's right. He remembered John I of the Calating dynasty in the Kingdom of France. When his father Louis Taint died, only his daughter, Jean, remained after him. She could not take the throne, since the queen was pregnant. Therefore, the younger brother Louis Taints became regent, and waited for the birth. As a result, a boy was born, John, who became king immediately from birth. But he died less than a week after birth, and the younger brother Louis took the throne, becoming Philip V. The main character, thoughtfully sorting through his toys, noted that this was not a very pleasant story. Something similar happened in a country called China in the year 106 in the province of Eastern Han. After the death of the fourth emperor He Han, Liu Long was received at court and enthroned as emperor. He was placed on the throne more than 100 days after his birth, and his relatives vied for power in politics. A year later, he died. Suddenly, it dawned on the protagonist that he could be killed too. He vividly imagined a picture of death in the form of a skeleton coming for him and tightly squeezing his head. His imagination was so vivid that it seemed real to him. The protagonist looked around and noticed something dark in the upper corner of the room. He thought that he did not want to die. He had only just been reborn. He was not asked if he wanted to be emperor. Why kill him? He did not want to, and besides, he became very scared. The protagonist cried bitterly and loudly. The nanny immediately ran to him, picked him up in her arms, and rocking him, asked what was the matter. Was he hungry already? He tried to tell her in his baby talk that it wasn't that. Why kill him if he had just been reborn? The nanny calmed him down, but his anxious thoughts wouldn't leave him. There had to be a way to survive. The protagonist felt the vibrations in the air again. He wondered if it was something he had felt when he was born that was still floating in the air. He thought it was somehow connected to him. Maybe it was something magical? This world reminded him of European fantasy. It was quite possible that there was magic here, right? No, he definitely had been reborn in another world after all. There had to be magic here. The nannies were talking among themselves about how even today his majesty was full of strength. The protagonist, looking at them, thought he didn't know how to activate this magic, but it was worth trying. He tried to activate the spell in his baby language so that the wind would listen to him. MC stretched out his small hands, but nothing happened. The nanny who sat down next to him laughed. He looked so funny at that moment. The protagonist was embarrassed, stopped looking at him with such a grin. A few days later, the aristocrats were supposed to gather. The protagonist thought warily that nothing should happen. If they wanted to make an attempt on his life, they would hardly wait until he grew up. No matter how developed medicine is, the mortality rate in infancy is much higher than in adults. This means that it would be easier to disguise an attempt as death from illness. In other words, at this age, murder is easiest to hide, and if they don't kill him, then it means that it is more profitable for them to use him. Will he really have to live his whole life as someone's puppet? But whose puppet then? Usually, those who want power always try to stand out. After some time, the aristocrats gathered in the mansion. One of them turned to the protagonist and said that they had gathered here to congratulate him on the new year. All the aristocrats bowed respectfully before their emperor. The protagonist, looking closely at their faces, thought irritably that he would figure them out. They all seemed to him to be evil creatures with burning eyes. Philip also asked him to accept their sincere congratulations on the holiday, and the master of ceremonies and everyone else also seemed to the protagonist to be evil creatures. He thought, in fact, reincarnation is not like in the game at all. Will he be able to survive in this world? So, day after day, he began to live in fear for his life. One day, waking up, he noticed that he learned the name of the country and that he was the emperor of this empire. Another day, in fear of an assassination attempt. A little more than a year has passed since he was reborn in this world as a helpless baby. As soon as he becomes inconvenient to his confidants, he will be doomed to death at the hands of the aristocrats. The protagonist went to the window, looked at the bright sun, and noted, the weather is nice. Noticing the cage with the bird, he compared himself to it. He felt the same as it did, locked in a cage. He had no choice but to sit in his room, although usually, cute princesses are in such a position. At that moment, he saw his nanny doing magic in the yard. She activated a fire clot, and controlling it, she set fire to the trash in the trash can. MC saw magic for the first time in his second life, albeit only for a moment, but he caught a bright flash of light. He did not notice how the nanny entered his room. The protagonist was still standing at the window, wondering, was it magic? He wanted to look at it some more. At that moment, the nanny asked him if he wanted to take a walk in the garden. The protagonist shuddered at the unexpectedness of her arrival, and then looked at her in surprise. Was he allowed to do that? Being constantly within four walls is depressing. You need to go out and breathe fresh air from time to time. The nanny took the cradle, put the protagonist in it, and carried him out into the garden. The girl carried the cradle out into the garden and put it on the ground. The protagonist was disappointed. There was such beauty all around. Flowers were blooming. Soft grass was spreading on the ground. He knew that the emperor would not be allowed to just lie on the ground, and it was sad. Looking at the nanny, the protagonist realized that she just wanted to rest and drink tea. Such a walk is no different from staying in the room. MC looked at the trash can in which the nanny burned the trash, and he wanted to try magic again. But last time he didn't succeed. Maybe something has changed now? After all, something invisible was constantly hovering in the air inside. He felt it since birth. It must have something to do with magic. The protagonist looked at his hand. If he could somehow manipulate it at will, maybe he would understand why he didn't have security. He could definitely use personal security. The protagonist sadly noted that at least he would have a textbook on magic, although he still couldn't read the local symbols. And if he stood out too much, they would definitely finish him off. His imagination instantly drew a picture of how it could be. For example, the nanny would definitely notice that he could already use magic, and even his killer would greet him with respect. In general, wherever he looked, there was a dead end. Suddenly, he saw several leaves descend through the air. The protagonist decided to try magic anyway, and babbled a spell in his own language so that water would come to him. In the next few seconds, he was amazed beyond measure, because a small water ball appeared next to him. However, it didn't last long, and the ball burst. Having come to his senses from his surprise, the protagonist thought in bewilderment, that was water just now. Does that mean that he succeeded? But why hadn't he succeeded before? He wanted to try it again. But at that moment, the nanny told him that it was time for him to return to his room. She picked him up, and he began to indignantly wriggle out of her arms, screaming in his babble for her not to carry him away. Let them stay here a little longer. He wanted to walk a little longer, but the girl only hugged him tighter and began to persuade him to stop screaming. They needed to go back. That very night, the protagonist couldn't sleep. He looked out from behind the canopy and saw that his maid was fast asleep. He was surprised. She should be watching him and not sleeping, right? But in any case, he was just lucky. The protagonist tiptoed off the bed, stood next to it, closed his eyes, and cast a spell to make water come to him. Opening his eyes, he realized that nothing had happened. Strange. It worked in the garden, but not in the room. After thinking for a while, the protagonist came to the conclusion that not everyone in this world can use magic, and magic itself can be used to attempt on him. And the only way to prevent an attempt is to prohibit the use of magic indoors. He did not know whether it was some kind of magical tool or a barrier, but it was indoors, and this something that he felt in the air blocked the magic. The protagonist had no idea how the magic of this world worked, the rules, the effect, the functions, and the cost of use. Everything was unknown to him. And yes, he didn't know what its price was. Frankly speaking, he didn't understand anything about it at all. It seemed to him that he could only study it by studying the mythology and legends of this world. If this was some kind of spirit magic, then he was clearly out of luck. The protagonist returned to bed again and decided to think about what he could do now. The thought came to him by itself. He could study his body. He was still a baby, so he could relieve himself everywhere. He couldn't control it, and there was nothing to be ashamed of. Although at first he was very ashamed, especially when the nanny told him that it was time to change his diaper. Of course, in reality, these were not diapers at all, but some kind of uncomfortable fabric. Obviously, in this case, every time he relieved himself, they needed to be changed. But nothing like that was necessary, because this organ was clearly some kind of magical object. At first, he was very worried, because he did not know what it was like to wear this tool every day. But in the end, he decided to forget about it for now, because it did not cause discomfort. Although, if you think about it, this thing is strange. Now that he was convinced of the existence of magic, he was sure that this organ was a magical tool. It consisted of a small tube and a tip. The tip was changed daily, and the tube was removed when bathing. The tool absorbed secretions, so the diaper remained clean. Most likely, it was removed so that it did not detect water as secretions. Apparently, it activates some kind of water absorption, compression, or transfer magic. But then, why does the magic of this tool work indoors? It seemed to him that the key to unraveling the mystery of magic was hidden in the tip. In fact, it is not always replaced with exactly the same one. It comes in different shapes, and some kind of mark is engraved on it. He noticed this when it was changed. Perhaps this mark is some kind of a trademark of artisans. Is this a disposable tool, and does the master make it by hand every time? The protagonist was sweating from his own thoughts. He didn't know how expensive it was, but most likely it was damn expensive to buy them all the time. Although, why should he think about it? He is the emperor. So much money is thrown away on it. The protagonist wanted to understand. Is this really normal? People won't rebel from such expenses? Otherwise, the guillotine would definitely await him. The protagonist mentally apologized to ordinary people for such waste. That's all he could think about now. He can only wait and watch. After a while, despair took hold of the protagonist. What if there is a reserve of magical powers in this world, and it becomes larger the more often a person uses magic? In that case, he must use magic every day. The protagonist noted that it did not look like he could open some system window to check the characteristics in this world. Even if his powers increased, he would not notice it, but he would still not be able to use magic in the room. In order to train magic, he had to go out into the garden. He absolutely had to learn how to use magic. So he came up with a unique method. He learned to use his childhood emotions. He cried when the ever-sleepy maid tried to calm him down. He cried when the nanny tried to calm him down. And only when they took him out into the garden did he calm down. So they came up with the idea that if they took him out into the garden, he would stop crying. And when no one was looking at him in the garden, he practiced magic and even figured it out a little. First, he realized that magical power was inside the body. For example, a flowing magical energy appeared around his hand. If you use magical power in the body and in the air, then using magic became easier. It was somewhat similar to collecting iron sand with a magnet. Magic power is easy to collect and easy to manipulate. If you use this power only from the air, then the magic is hard to control and it is impossible to practice. Therefore, he decided to use the magic power in his body. Secondly, he figured out the reserve of magic power, but one thing was still a mystery to him. Did the overall reserve of magic power in the body increase? In a fantasy world without a system, it is very inconvenient. However, when he used the magic power from the body, it seemed to him that it almost did not decrease. At least, he felt so it was not accurate. But he thought that the reserve of magic power does not run out. Maybe the thing is that the magic power from the body is used to start the spell, and the power from the air is used to activate. Thirdly, if we talk about magic itself, he was able to use it once. His perception of the world helped him understand how magic works in general. For example, it was easier to create a ball of water the day after rain, and after sunny days, on the contrary, it took a long time. The protagonist knew that there was water in the atmosphere, so he probably used magic to unconsciously gather this water into water balls. Ultimately, it all depended on the humidity of the air. He also learned to create ice using magic, and it didn't depend on temperature or humidity. He created it out of nothing. When he created it, he imagined a game or anime. From here, the protagonist made several conclusions about magic. The magic in the body, which directly starts the magic, depends on the magic in the air. This process is no different regardless of the type of magic, but then there were differences. The magic that creates water collected water from the atmosphere into a water ball. The magic that creates ice itself became ice in the air. Because of his perception that water is created by a natural phenomenon, the magic power collected water from the atmosphere, and he perceived the creation of ice from anime and games, so the magic power itself took the form of ice. But the protagonist was not yet sure which method was better. Perhaps he will be able to dispel his perception of creating water over time. Now he had better focus on the new magic. He must use other spells. Before the people who decided to leave him alive for now change their minds, he will become stronger. A couple of days later, he was taken out into the garden again. He looked around from his cradle and thought that this was a great chance for him. There was no one around. How is the use of magic blocked indoors? Why do magic tools work despite the blocking of magic? How does the supply of magical powers work, and is it bottomless? How does perception affect magic? The protagonist sighed dejectedly. Many questions that have not yet been answered, but he wanted to finally rejoice for the first time since his reincarnation. For the first time, he will do what he wants. Closing his eyes, the protagonist cast a spell to make the wind blow. MC thought with a smile that magic was his ray of hope. This time, he succeeded. Emperor is the title of a monarch, a king among kings, the head of state ruling several nations. This is the title of a real ruler. At least, that's what the protagonist remembered. But for now, the emperor is being looked after by a maid. At the moment, Kara was trying to feed the protagonist, but he stubbornly refused. There was a reason for this too. By the age of 2, he had already grown up significantly, and now he could move around on his own, and his teeth had grown, and now he could eat on his own, just like an adult. He took a spoon, but could not hold it, and it fell to the floor. The surprised maid, wiping away his tears, said that he did not need to hurry. She could feed him for now. The protagonist noted dejectedly that he was locked in the body of a 2-year-old child, and was still too weak and not ready for an independent life. Therefore, he had to continue to play the role of an unsuspecting child, and he did not like at all that beautiful maids were looking after him. And finally, he began to talk, but in order not to overdo it, he spoke at a level appropriate for a 2-year-old child, so as not to arouse unnecessary suspicion. The protagonist invited his nanny to sit down on a chair. She was touched by his gallantry. If everyone found out that he already knew how to communicate at the level of adults, he would have problems, so he limited himself to phrases consisting of a couple of words. Even his potential killers would think, he is a smart emperor, right? Then, even more so, they will try to finish him off as quickly as possible. However, it was great to finally be able to chat a little, to ask the maids a question. Their stories were an important source of information for him, since there was no one else who could tell him about this world. One day, Kara told him a story she had heard Mr. Philip mention. The protagonist grabbed her hand and asked her who he was. Kara smiled and told him that he was a grandfather he knew. The protagonist had already realized that when a child asked them something, they would always answer. But for now, he could only ask them simple questions. But compared to when he was a baby, it was good that he could at least gather the information he needed this way. In addition, since he was a small child, the maids often gossiped around him. The protagonist was silently indignant. It was at least unprofessional to gossip in front of their emperor, but he would not like them to stop doing this. It was a very valuable source of information for him. By the way, some old man has been coming to his room recently. Just when the protagonist was thinking about him, Carl came to him again and greeted him happily. The chancellor expressed his joy to the protagonist that he was in good health. MC noted that the maids often gossiped about him. They say that he is currently the person with the most power in this country, and as the prime minister, he takes a direct part in the political life of the country. Although shouldn't the emperor have the highest power? Oh, right, he is still a puppet emperor. Karl is also called Lord Raoul, and he controls almost all of the country's politics. From the point of view of the Philip faction, Karl used his position to line his own pockets. Incidentally, the chancellor is a distant relative of the protagonist. To be precise, he is the eldest son of MC's great-grandfather's brother, as well as the brother of his late great-grandmother. That is, his grandfather, the previous emperor, and his grandmother, his grandfather's wife, were cousins. By the way, before the wedding of his grandfather and grandmother, marriages between cousins were prohibited, and it was considered a criminal offense. But why was their marriage approved? The protagonist did not know the details, but he could assume that it was definitely connected with the fact that the chancellor's younger brother was the head of the local religion, His Holiness George V. The local church was subordinate to him, and they did everything to strengthen the position of the family. Therefore, they bent not only politics, but also religion to suit themselves. MC remembered another old man, but before he had time to think about him, Philip himself came to him and asked the maids, "Is the emperor here?" When the master of ceremonies saw the protagonist, he loudly expressed his joy at their meeting. The protagonist knew that Philip Akakar was supposedly his grandfather. He is also called Lord Akakar, or the Great Lord. Every lord in this country owns his own territory. Philip is also one of the protagonist's relatives. He is his mother's father, It turns out that he is the protagonist's grandfather on his mother's side. According to the Prime Minister's faction, he manipulates the now Dowager Empress, increases the number of government posts, and slows down the development of politics. Philip gives out government positions to members of his faction, which he himself invents. Of course, each of these positions receives a salary from the treasury. Thus, he drags money from the treasury into the pockets of his faction. They both, Karl and Philip, come to him, greet him, and then say nasty things about each other and leave. From the MC's point of view, it is useless to say such things to a child. I think this is called imprinting. In general, both of these factions are fighting for the balance of power in the Empire. However, at the moment, it seems that the Prime Minister's faction has an advantage. It is not entirely clear why, of course, because the position of Regent is occupied by a person from the faction of the Master of Ceremonies. By the way, despite the close family connection, the protagonist himself did not belong to the Philippe faction. The Regent's duties include helping the young emperor until he reaches adulthood. The Regent was the daughter of Philippe, the mother of the protagonist, Regent Alexia. Evening came, and the protagonist went to his bed. Falling asleep, he thought about his mother. She had not come to him for a long time. Her second child, born recently, died of illness, so she does not leave her room. By the way, the protagonist's father, Crown Prince Jean, died before he was born. The protagonist heard that he allegedly died in battle, but he suspected that it was an assassination attempt. The situation was like this. Now MC's mother simply left him alone and locked herself in her room, and her recent child was conceived in a relationship with some aristocrat. By the way, it seems that he was her close person when her father was still alive. Although they say that the child died of an illness, it looked suspicious. He was still the second potential heir to the throne. And now Alexia seemed to often lose consciousness after long nights of mourning her son. And the child, according to the protagonist, was most likely killed by Philip. The protagonist even felt a little sorry. The protagonist, albeit vaguely, retained memories of his mother from his past life. He thought that the difference between them was colossal. He could not bring himself to call Alexia his mother, and he did not feel anything for her. Maids often gossip about everything. If the maids know, then most likely the rest guess too. The protagonist sighed and noted some doomed country, a disgrace, not an empire. By the way, he also had not seen nannies for a long time. Probably, the thing is that he does not need to be breastfed anymore. Come to think of it, he had so many people taking care of him during this period. 7 independent aristocratic nannies, 10 maids from the Prime Minister's faction, and 10 maids from the Philip faction. He knew that all the nannies were independent aristocrats. To be honest, he even felt a bit sad that they were no longer by his side. Independent aristocrats are people who do not belong to either the Karl faction or the Philip faction, and they were neutral. Although there are only a few of them, they had decisive votes in the court. Most of them are officials who do not own their own territory, unlike Karl and Philip, who manage their own land plots. Many aristocrats in their factions also have their own lands. MC noted that if he ever interferes in political life, then first of all, the aristocrats will support him. In the event of the collapse of the empire, independent aristocrats will be in the most disadvantageous position. Without belonging to one of the factions, they will be left with nothing. Therefore, recently many of them, from the independent category, began to join one of the parties. Otherwise, they risk losing everything. MC sighed. Yes, this world is so cruel, but without the help of independent aristocrats, it is better not to get involved in politics. The risk of death was too high. He continued to think about the high infant mortality rate in this world, and in the struggle for power between the two factions. If the emperor died in the arms of a nanny who belonged to one of the factions, that faction would be held responsible. Even if it was not murder, children in this world often die of disease, and if he died, Karl and Philip would have to choose a new emperor, and the side that was responsible for his death would not be able to put their puppet on the throne. The chances were almost zero. Therefore, the only people from the factions around him were the maids who took care of him in shifts. In fact, he was surrounded by only potential enemies. After a while, the protagonist, looking at Kara and Alicia, thought, are they not going to take the initiative and train him? Kara, surprised by his appearance, asked him if something happened. He answered her that everything was fine. The protagonist understood that it was inappropriate to call these girls enemies. They were dragged in just as much as he was. In the end, it was the people in power who started this mess. The situation in the empire is such that ordinary people have no choice but to follow their lead. The protagonist was overcome with righteous indignation. He thought angrily, mentally addressing Karl and Philip, that he would not forgive them for wanting to use him. That was precisely why, in his past life, he did not like people in power. He thought irritably, was he really reincarnated just to obey them? Why didn't he open his eyes in the body of some high-ranking aristocrat? Suddenly, a bird's trill caught his attention. But when he looked out the window, the bird had already fluttered away from the tree branch. It was clear to the protagonist that he had been given the ability to wield magic. He could use it simply to survive, or he could try to escape with it. He wondered if he could become invisible. MC decided that he would run away as soon as he reached independent age. He wouldn't mind living like a normal person. It would be better than living in fear of being killed at any moment. His life could be much calmer and, most importantly, free, like that bird. Therefore, he needs to continue to increase his supply of magical power. The protagonist again imagined the images of his main enemies and angrily promised them that they would see what a common man is capable of. He will not dance to their tune. When, tired of his thoughts, the protagonist fell asleep, he had a dream. He, already a grown man, entered into a battle with a monster on a dark night. The protagonist exclaimed that his name was Carmine, and he must stop him here. His opponent was a huge dragon, which was spewing deadly flames from its mouth. MC clearly saw how the flame turned into a magical ball of fire, which was supposed to destroy him. Without the slightest fear, the protagonist rushed to attack, passed through the deadly fire, and with a cry that he had come to an end, defeated the dragon. Opening his eyes, he looked around, recognized the outlines and furnishings of his room, and sadly realized that it was just a dream. He was overcome by thoughts again. He was reincarnated as the emperor of this country. His name is Carmine. He is the emperor, and he is already 4 years old. With such a status, his dream of a great adventure is not destined to come true. He jumped out of bed and thought that today he will need to practice magic. He started using it by accident, and since then he has been practicing. The amount of magic he can use increased. The protagonist has already learned to wield magic well in several elements. He wondered what this is, the benefits of reincarnation. He liked being able to move his body freely and being able to use magic. It was cool. It's like unlocking achievements in a game. But out of all the magic, he wanted to focus on 2. The first was the magic that allowed him to move things through the air. He called it magic manipulation. At its core, it was just telekinesis, a very convenient thing. So far, he could only manipulate something light, like a small rock or a leaf, and he noticed something interesting. Ice created with magic and a lump of earth, torn out by earth magic, were much easier to manipulate. Manipulating an object created with magic was much easier. Maybe it was because the volume and mass of the object were created with his magic, but for now, he didn't understand it. Of course, it would be great if one day he could do things like attack with telekinesis. It might look useless, but he really wanted it. The second was magic that manipulated heat, which he learned to use when he tried to freeze things. Freezing magic could be used when you could just imagine how the object was frozen. But without understanding what thermal energy is and how it works, magic will have no effect. Although, ice creating magic is quite simple. In addition, in the process of practicing freezing magic, he learned the opposite. Now he could heat something. The protagonist sat down on the porch step and noted to himself, he probably still has a lot to learn. His body is extremely weak because he is still a small child, and there is a high probability that he will catch a cold and die before an attempt is made on him. Therefore, in this regard, this magic is convenient and useful for regulating temperature. It allows you to easily keep cool in the summer and hot in the winter. And most importantly, he found that converting magical energy into heat is much easier and more efficient than creating flames. In other words, you can get more heat with less magical power. Flames would require 3 times more magical power than just creating thermal energy. In short, magical energy becomes hot. The protagonist looked at the house he lived in, at the nature around him, and noticed a leaf that was falling alone to the ground. He put his finger out, activated magical heat energy, and the leaf, touching his finger, was burned. Thus, Carmine learned the heat ray attack. Finally, at the age of 3, he received an attack ability, but it was too early to rejoice. This method of attack did not give an immediate effect, since it was necessary to continuously irradiate the target. His vivid imagination drew a picture where he attacked his potential killer with a heat ray, but MC realized that it would be useless. He would not be able to defend himself like this. He would have to find a better way. First of all, he needed to learn to better manage the magical power in his body. Internal magical power is essentially the initial fuel for activating magic. The protagonist learned to accumulate and restrain internal magic inside his body without activating magic. This is a good exercise for practicing managing magical power. Maybe it just seemed to him, but he seemed to feel that the concentration of magical power inside his body was higher than the concentration of magical power in the air, although he couldn't say for sure. But he saw and understood that his training was definitely paying off. And so, while he was thinking, his day flew by. When he went to bed, the protagonist thought that he still couldn't cast spells in the room. The protagonist heard a loud snort and wondered what it was. Peeking out from behind the curtain, he was surprised to see that the maid was sleeping soundly in her place again. The protagonist was indignant. Was she even working? He noted ironically that his security was, of course, completely worthless. MC pulled the curtain back and decided to continue his investigation. He was afraid every day that he could be killed. Magic would become the main factor in his survival. Maybe he could learn some kind of invisibility magic? It seemed to him that invisibility or illusion could be useful, so he desperately tried to learn something like that. But so far, all was in vain. To activate magic in this world, you need to have a clear idea of what you want. To create fire and ice, he imagined a clear picture of these things. In despair, the protagonist grabbed his head How could he even imagine transparency or illusion? How does it even work? In his past life, he always had search engines at hand. He calmed down and decided to summarize what he knew. First, the activation of magic depends on natural phenomena such as temperature, humidity, etc. Second, correct representation is important for using magic. Third, things he cannot imagine cannot be recreated with magic. Fourth, is the concentration of magical power in his body higher than in the air? Fifth, he could maintain the magical power in his body even indoors. And sixth, the magic tool on his organ works even indoors. By the way, the protagonist wears this improvised diaper only at night. He is already 3 years old, so he can go to the toilet on his own. But before taking it off, he would like to study this mechanism thoroughly. By the way, the toilets in this world are also flush, but not like in the previous world. This looked like a small square toilet, and inside there was something like a water pipe. The protagonist was a little surprised because he had heard that there were no flush toilets in medieval Europe, but there was something similar with a flush in Rome. So maybe it wasn't that surprising. From his previous observations, he assumed that there was some kind of magic built into the tip. It was activated by some kind of mechanism in the tip. The protagonist couldn't say for sure, but he thought that there was some kind of magic circle engraved there. He had an idea of the approximate structure, but he would still like to have a clearer idea. But with his current knowledge of this world, he could only imagine it primitively. If he were to study it now, it would start emitting light, and with this, he could wake up the maid. What was more important for him to know now was the magical power that was in the air. Could he use magic on it? The protagonist held the tip in his hand, closed his eyes, and called for the magical power to heat up. The tip immediately lit up with a bright light, and the protagonist felt how it heated up. To prove it, he pressed it to his palm and noted with satisfaction that a mark was left on his hand. MC thought with admiration, and indeed, it heated up. It turns out that there really is magical power inside. It became clear to him that due to some kind of anti-magic barrier, presumably created by the magical tool, he could not use his magic in the room, but he discovered something curious. In this room, the magical power of the air was blocked. When the protagonist used magic, he used the magical power in the air to transform it into some phenomenon. It's like sculpting clay, for example. He would like to mold a chavan. Clay is magical power. Then he needs the clay in order to mold a chavan from it. The chavan itself is the result of the final magic. If the clay dries out, then nothing will come of it, and there will be no use for it. The magic power in this room is blocked. Nothing can be created from it. Therefore, he cannot use magic. But the magic power in his body can move, as can the magic power in magic tools. But the magic power in the air is useless. The protagonist noted with admiration that this was a great discovery. It turned out that if the magic power from the air is not used, then the activation of magic is possible. Thus, there is no magic tool in this room that prohibits the use of all magic. These 2 points changed a lot. MC could not launch something in the room that was created with magic. With his current methods of activating magic, he will not be able to defend himself. The protagonist immediately interrupted his train of thought. He realized that when he studied the magic tool, for a moment he noticed a surge of magic power from within. So, the magic power released into the air is not immediately blocked. It turns out that if he releases magic power from the body, then in theory, not for long, but his spell will still be able to fly some distance. And if the killer gets into the room, he will activate Carmine's flash. The protagonist thought with hope. It should have worked, right? In principle, he had found a way to defend himself. But just in case, it needed to be tested. The protagonist stood up on the bed, touched his magical organ, and noticed that it was easy to control it in the body. The problem was, how could he cause it to burst? MC closed his eyes and forced himself to fully imagine the magical power inside the body, like a liquid. How it passes through muscles and skin, tiny particles of magic. The protagonist saw small particles on his palm and thought, here it is, and now he needed to convert it into thermal energy. Suddenly his hand lit up and he felt warmth in it. Carmine, not holding back his joyful emotions, exclaimed that he had succeeded. After all, he had a strong concentration of magical power in his body. His hand was incredibly hot. Suddenly, the protagonist felt himself shaking, and his strength seemed to be leaving him. He wondered what it could be. What was this feeling of weakness? Sitting on the edge of the bed, he realized it was because the magic power in his body was exhausted. He had to lie down on the bed, where he lost consciousness. When the internal magic power runs out, a person loses consciousness. Carmine had learned a lot today and had spent a lot of magic energy. When he opened his eyes, the protagonist thought, what was going on? Why was it so noisy in his room? Looking out, the main characters saw the court doctor and Alicia. They were talking about something. He remembered that he had tested whether he could use magic indoors, and then his magic power ran out and he fell asleep. So the court doctor immediately rushed to see if he was okay, right? The doctor came to him and asked him how he was feeling. The protagonist smiled at him and replied that he was fine. The protagonist noted that it seemed that some of his power had already been restored. Perhaps in this world, humans have an organ that generates magic power? In any case, he had no choice but to learn everything through trial and error. At this moment, the protagonist heard Alicia scolding the maid for her poor performance. The protagonist remarked, is she angry at his maid? Well, yes, it was her fault since she was sleeping at her workplace. But being able to use magic indoors is very useful. Although he did not expect that he would be attacked by such a strong feeling of weakness. Therefore, magic that immediately makes him lose consciousness after using it is clearly not practical. But wasn't he increasing his internal reserve of magic power? It was probably just a coincidence that he lost consciousness. Some time had passed since the fainting incident, and the protagonist was allowed to go out into the yard. On this day, he decided to practice a little light magic that would not wake up the maid. Just as he was about to do it, the maid exclaimed, "What is he doing there?" The protagonist shuddered from her unexpected shout, and the light that had just begun to be created broke into small pieces. The maid admonished him that he should not pick up any things from the floor. The protagonist was offended and indignant. He did not pick up anything from the floor and showed her his empty hands. The maid looked at him suspiciously, then examined his hands and noted that indeed he did not pick up anything. Straightening up, she told him that she needed to clean his room, so he should behave well. He should not pick up any nasty things from the floor, and if he needs something, he should call her. To each of her suggestions, the protagonist answered that he understood everything. He would do everything as she asked. When the maid left, the protagonist breathed a sigh of relief. A little more, and she would understand that he can do magic. But now he was interested in something else. Did he disperse the magic power in the air and did not lose consciousness? The protagonist listened to himself and realized, after all, the amount of magic power in his body was growing. Now when he activates magic, he can immediately disperse it. The protagonist tried to do it again and only became even more convinced that it works. In addition, he was able to suck in magic power from the air. Now he knew exactly how to quickly restore magic power, but how to say it. After absorbing it, he had a feeling of satiety and overflowing inside. Several days had already passed since he practiced. Light magic uses magic power to increase and decrease brightness and maintain light radiation. At that moment, he tried to quickly disperse magic, and in the end, he only wasted magic power. At least, he thought so. Magic power was fluid then. He imagined it as a small particle, and how he took it into his body. He also learned to activate magic indoors. The protagonist imagined particles of magic passing through his skin and muscles. The protagonist gave an image to his small magical power and called it magical essence. When he had a feeling of fullness, it meant that magical power from the air filled his body. How much magic power he could store depended on his body's ability. MC knew that his magic power limit was still low. He wondered what he should do now. Was it somehow related to the fact that he could feel the difference between the magic power inside his body and the magic power outside? He drew a picture in his mind, and it seemed like a digestion process. It seemed like the magic power in his body was much more concentrated than in the air. When he used magic manipulation to mix the magic power in his body with the magic power in the air, the feeling of being overcrowded disappeared. It took a lot of concentration. But if he could accumulate magic power in his body like this, it would greatly help him cast magic indoors. The protagonist called it a recovery technique. However, it was not an advantage if other magicians knew about it too. Most likely, it was obvious to them. But since he was a puppet emperor, he would hardly receive a decent education. He has no choice but to learn on his own. In fact, he had no desire to become an emperor, but the role of a monarch was thrown at him without asking him if he needed it at all. Even sitting on the throne, he felt uncomfortable, especially since it seemed to be swallowing him up with its size. And as luck would have it, recently more and more aristocrats began to loom before his eyes. And now, one elderly aristocrat bowed before him, introduced himself to him, and said that he was his faithful servant. The protagonist looked at him and noted that perhaps this old man was another big shot, an influential person in the empire. But what was the point of coming to him while he was still a child? He was still too small. The face and name of this person would not linger in his memory even for one day, but still, there was a point in it for him. He began to understand how to distinguish between people in the Chancellor's faction and those in the Master of Ceremonies faction. The Chancellor's people addressed him as the Great Count Raoul, while the Philippe people simply called their leader Akikar. The Philippe people simply called the Chancellor Count Raoul and their leader respectfully. And only those who maintained a neutral position did not add anything. There are people whose official position differs from their actual position, but the fact that the protagonist learned to distinguish who belonged to which faction was already a huge progress for him. The protagonist chuckled and noted that he was lucky that he learned this before he began to formally speak with the aristocrats. At that moment, his thoughts were interrupted by Alicia, who told him that he should return to the room. The protagonist meekly agreed with her. On the way, he thought about how maids were always hanging around him. It seemed to him that they were all the daughters of lower aristocrats. Apparently, they work as servants, and in exchange, they receive an education. And naturally, they are a very valuable source of information for him, because the girls love to gossip. But more importantly, they considered him a child, and not a puppet like the others. The protagonist was an adult inside, so he had controversial feelings about it, but he was still very grateful to the maids. Thanks to the fact that he was still a child, they answered any question he asked. As soon as he turned to them, they were immediately ready to help him with everything they could, including information. Naturally, for now they only answered simple questions like, "What is this?" or "What is that?" They are unlikely to help him with politics, and it is too early for him to ask about such things. By the way, the fact that maids from different factions took care of him was very convenient. They did not work together, they changed each time, and each of them had different information. Since the protagonist was reborn, he already knew a lot, including unnatural things for his age. For example, he understood how to use the toilet. He immediately figured out how and what to do here. He had some concerns. The protagonist hoped that the maids would not suspect anything, since no one taught him this. And when this became known, the girl who was working that day, with a smile, others have already taught him. In other words, she thought that he had already been taught how to use the toilet by the maids of another faction. Thanks to this, the protagonist did not arouse any suspicion. He knew the history of the founding of this empire. The ancient empire of Lothar fell, and its territory was divided into several countries that often feuded with each other. This time was called the Era of Civil Strife. At the same time, a distant relative of the last emperor of the Lothar Empire gathered people loyal to him and founded a new empire, declaring to everyone that his country had inherited all the rights and power of the previous empire, and he called it the Bungarth Empire. And here he is, the protagonist, already the 8th emperor of this country. By the way, the imperial palace consists of several palaces. Each new emperor for some reason adds a new palace, such is the tradition. Now the territory has grown so much that they traveled on a carriage. He could only move around in this mansion, but someday he will see the world. The mansion in which the protagonist lived was built by the 6th emperor, and its size was clearly not small. The protagonist thought he's still little, and it seemed to him that this mansion is too huge. It seems that this place used to be the residence of the emperor's son, and also the 7th emperor lived here, that is his grandfather, Emperor Edward IV. The protagonist did not even know what he looked like, but he clearly will not complain about the house where his grandfather lived. In his past life, he also did not remember his grandfather. He was not in his life. MC noted with slight sadness, as in this world. Recently, the protagonist heard one important thing. To become an emperor, one must go through 2 ceremonies, receiving the title of crown prince and ascending to the throne. Only in this way could the emperor officially take the throne. But he is a direct relative of the monarch, meaning he was born one, so these 2 ceremonies have been postponed for now. This is why Charles and Philip are fighting over who will be his regent. That is, who will conduct the ceremony of his becoming crown prince, and which of them will place the crown on his head. The protagonist thought, with slight apprehension, that the one who places the crown on him will be inferior in power only to the emperor himself. Although he did not care about them, let them gnaw at each other as much as they want. Now, along with a possible assassination attempt on him, he was worried about another thing. He lacked knowledge of magic, history, geography, but so far everything was going according to his plan for survival in this country. The protagonist mentally addressed all the higher-ups, let them do whatever they want with this country. He will still escape from here. Despite everything and everyone, he will definitely survive. He was reborn in this world 4 years ago as the ruler of an empire that could be torn apart by internal strife at any moment. Yes, at first the protagonist fell into despair, but now he had hope. It was magic. Having honed this power, he would definitely escape from this hellish place. His thoughts were interrupted by his maid, who told him that she had brought him a suit. The protagonist thought that the suit that the maid had brought him was tailored specifically for him, but he would only wear it once. Such a waste. Of course, he could have dressed himself, but it was better not to show it to anyone. Therefore, he allowed the maid to dress him in the suit. By the way, he was not alone in the bathroom either, but with the maid. Adjusting the sleeves of his shirt, the protagonist noted that if they brought him a suit, it would be his first public appearance. Because he was small, due to his situation, he was forbidden to go outside the house. No matter what awaited him today, he was very happy that he would finally be able to go beyond these 4 walls and the garden. When he went outside, he noted with surprise, wow, they even brought him a carriage. It was very beautiful, and the silent coachman proudly sat on his bench, driving beautiful horses in a harness. The protagonist asked the maid in surprise, "Are they going to ride in this?" The girl smiled and answered him that they were. MC happily, not without the help of the maid of course, climbed into the carriage and they set off. The protagonist did not know that carriages shook so much, but he liked it. He compared it to an amusement ride. He was having fun. Suddenly, he became serious. Well, he got out, got into the carriage. Why was he happy about it? Like a child? Did his physical age somehow affect his psychological image? After thinking about it, he came to the conclusion that this was true, and it irritated him. At that moment, the maid informed him that they had arrived. The protagonist was very surprised by this, and while thinking, he did not even notice the distance. The maid helped him out of the carriage. The protagonist looked around, saw a very beautiful building in front of him, and thought, is this a church? Puzzled why he was brought here, he stepped inside. He looked around the interior, and noticed a ship in the stained glass window in which some leader was located. He had no particular religious beliefs, but he didn't like places like that. And this one was even more so. It was too pretentious. MC saw something on the dais and irritably noted that they had overdone it with his throne too. They had gone too far with the decorations. He didn't like it. Did no one in this country have taste? But in fact, it wasn't that important now. He asked the maid what was there on the dais. The maid answered him that there was a funeral today. The protagonist asked her again in surprise. A funeral? The maid explained to him that this was what they called seeing off the deceased. The protagonist thought that he knew this without her. He meant something else. Carmine rephrased his question. He asked the girl who was being buried. She hesitated with an answer. MC noted, "Well, what was it? Maybe Philip? Or maybe Carl died? That would be nice." The maid said that it was Norn de Alleman. The name meant nothing to the protagonist. At that moment, Carl appeared behind them and told him that this was the funeral of the protagonist's grandfather's concubine. The protagonist shuddered at his sudden appearance. The maid immediately bowed to the chancellor. The man told the protagonist that they had not seen him for a long time. Carmine shuddered. The prime minister acted as if he was the ruler of the country. He asked Carl, "Concubine?" The chancellor answered him. When his grandfather, His Imperial Majesty, passed away, everyone was overcome with terrible grief, and his mother locked the two concubines in a dark tower. It became clear to the protagonist that when his father died, since his mother was pregnant, it was possible that the concubines could also become pregnant. Therefore, Alexia locked them under lock and key, and even when it turned out that both of them were not pregnant, she did not let them out. It seems that one of them died, so they decided to hold her funeral. The protagonist looked around and noticed that he did not see the regent here. It seemed to him that even his people were not here. Now it became clear to him he was here to drag him into their political games, right? The protagonist looked at the chancellor with irritation and mentally told him to show him what he was planning. Out loud, he said, making a sad face that he felt sorry for her. Mentally chuckling, MC watched Carl. Was he expecting such a reaction from him? The chancellor smiled and told him that it was true. He added that, in addition to this, the concubine killed the protagonist's 2-year-old brother. Seeing the surprised face of the protagonist, he continued, "But she was just a servant, not an aristocrat. This is unfair and terrible." MC was really surprised. A half-brother? So there was already an heir before he was born? But what if his mother was not an aristocrat? Then what problems? He looked at Carl and noted that this old man was not telling him something, but he clearly wanted to get the regency. From what the protagonist had heard, his grandfather should have been alive when his father died. As a result, he lost his son during his life and his grandson was killed. Was his grandfather really killed when he tried to take action after his grandson's death? And he could well have been killed by Philip's people. If you think about it, it was obvious that it was not for nothing that all his family members died one after another. The protagonist, tearing himself away from his thoughts, felt his impending possible death with his skin. After all, if he lets down his guard, he could die quickly. The protagonist and the maid sat down on a bench in anticipation. His Holiness Bishop George V approached them and informed the protagonist that he would be conducting the funeral today. He suggested that everyone present honor the deceased with a minute of silence. The protagonist stood up and thought irritably. He was the younger brother of the Prime Minister. George began his sermon. The protagonist thought, apparently, the main religion in this empire was the Holy Path. When saying goodbye to the dead, they say something about how they went to meet great saints. And for some reason, he also began to tell about the history of the founding of the Holy Path. By the way, when he spoke, the aristocrats sitting behind were chatting loudly among themselves. Surely, they were spreading rumors. This happens when people like concubines die. Well, or the emperor himself. The protagonist, watching everyone closely, was sure that the head of state affairs and the head of religion were in cahoots. The death of the concubine only played into their hands. The sermon, although not directly, will show who the church supports and will allow them to control the rest. They say that politics and religion go hand in hand. You can't think of a more accurate expression. In any case, listening to the bishop was very useful for him. According to the priest, a saint named Ain heard the voice of God. However, he thought it might be magic, so he did not believe it at first. No matter how many times God showed him a miracle, he did not believe it. Then God made him the chosen one. In other words, he gave him power. Ain used this power to perform various miracles, and finally believed in God. And then, he created a teaching to bring the word of God to the masses. But when he tried to talk about God, he was driven away from everywhere because people considered him a liar and a sorcerer. And then, under the guidance of the voice of God, and with a couple of people who believed him, he set sail. On the journey, they encountered many difficulties, but the power given to him by God allowed them to overcome all the trials. Finally, they arrived on another continent, the Promised Land. The teaching that the saint continued to spread on the new continent grew noticeably, and so the Holy Way was born. The protagonist, after listening to the bishop, thought that he now understood what was depicted on the stained glass windows of the church. The protagonist was grateful to the bishop for his story. Now he understood that each stained glass symbolized the divine power granted to Ain, his exile, the sea voyage, and how Ain and his people reached the Promised Land. He noted that this was very different from his world. Jorg interrupted his thoughts by saying that it was time to say the last farewell. Everyone began to approach the deceased and say goodbye to her. When the protagonist approached, he looked at her and thought that he had never met her, but he was sure that she was unlucky with her life. Even when she died, she was used for a political game. In addition to the fact that he heard about the death of his father from every corner, this is the first death that he saw with his own eyes in this world, and he did not want to get used to this feeling. The protagonist raised his eyes to him and mentally said, "If God really exists, at least after death, let him grant peace to the deceased." When the deceased was carried to the burial place, everyone silently saw her off on her last journey, and only the protagonist said, "Let her rest in peace." Although he himself could not be sure that he would wake up alive tomorrow, he had come to such a place, a truly terrible place. After the funeral ceremony, after some time, the protagonist was overcome by new thoughts. He thought about his grandfather, the 7th Emperor Edward IV. He was a wise ruler. The people loved him very much. The previous emperor had only one son, the father of MC, Crown Prince Jean. He was at war with a neighboring country and took command on the front lines. He fought side by side with the imperial soldiers, but unfortunately, he fell in battle from the sword of the enemy. Hearing this news, the protagonist's grandfather was overcome with grief. He fell ill with deep sadness and rage and died. That's how a nobleman named Stuart explained everything to him. He added that everything was so, the entire chronology of events. He then told the protagonist that although he was still young, a great future awaited him because he would lead their empire. He could expect their full support. The surprised protagonist answered that he heard him. He added that when the time came, he would definitely turn to him. The nobleman bowed to him and said that he would wait for him. The protagonist thought angrily, of course, as if he would remember another person who wanted to seize power. Lately, aristocrats began to flock to him in droves. It must be all because of that funeral, when Karl made loud speeches there. It was all the result of the Chancellor's propaganda at Norn's funeral. The impatient representatives of the Philip faction decided that it was time to start making a statement. Each faction pulled him to their side. Then, aristocrats from the Chancellor faction came to the protagonist and told him what bad people the Master of Ceremonies were, and so on in a circle. Every day, they told him something. Therefore, he was able to learn even more about this country. So far, everything looked like this. Due to the death of the previous prince, the emperor died of illness, and the throne of the emperor became vacant despite the war. In the chaos, the most influential roles were taken by Philip and Karl. In order to make peace, they gave the territories that belonged to the empire to the enemies. The protagonist suspected that everything was somehow too simple. Maybe they were connected with the enemy during the war? In any case, despite the fact that they worked together for some time, they can hardly be called allies. It just so happened that their goals coincided. They planned to put a convenient person in the place of the emperor, so that he would sit below the grass, quiet as a mouse. For them, this person was he, the protagonist. At that time, it was not yet known who the crown prince's wife would give birth to, a boy or a girl. He had not yet fully understood the laws of succession, but apparently a man had priority, and then a boy was born, that is him, Carmine. Therefore, it was decided to kill the other heirs that Philip and Karl were preparing. Was this necessary? The other heirs were definitely the child of the crown prince, and the child that his mistress was carrying. The protagonist shuddered, just some kind of bloodbath. This whole family has finally gone off the rails. If there are two people in power now, then why has the situation in the country not yet escalated into a civil war? There were two reasons for this. The first is simply the difference in combat power. The Chancellor's faction has almost half of the entire empire, both militarily and internally. Their territory is the most advanced. In case of war, Philip would not have a chance. Therefore, the Chancellor currently had more power, and Philip had no choice but to allow him everything. In addition, if he, the protagonist, dies, then he will most likely become the next emperor. This is provided for by the Empire's law on succession. Therefore, the Chancellor cannot completely ignore it. People higher in heredity than the Master of Ceremonies were killed by the Chancellor's hands. But Philip himself will simply not work out for Karl. Otherwise, he will be considered an ordinary rebel. As long as the Master of Ceremonies faction exists, the danger that there are traitors in the Chancellor's faction will never disappear. His, the protagonist's, death is not beneficial to the Chancellor. As long as Philip is alive, there is no need to explain why Philip cannot kill the protagonist. He is his daughter's son. If he kills him, it means he kills his grandson. If this becomes public knowledge, it will be a complete disgrace for him. Even though he will be the first in line to succeed, the aristocrats are unlikely to support someone who killed their grandson. Now, the protagonist needs to find the perfect balance and maintain equilibrium. As long as he remains neutral, he will remain a profitable puppet for them. Both camps are interested in brainwashing the protagonist and winning him over to their side. For him, who can read people, they will be an excellent source of information. The protagonist smiled and decided that the main thing is to continue to behave like a child of his age. Otherwise, he may be suspected. Until then, he will be grateful to these two idiots for the information. At this moment, Harkladif turned to him and informed him that there were no more meetings for today. He invited the protagonist to return to the room. The protagonist meekly left the throne. He thought about this man, that he was from a house that was entrusted to take care of him, his affairs, and personal belongings. This man was supported by both the people of the minister's faction and the Master of Ceremonies faction. In addition, some neutral nobles trusted him. It may seem that he can be trusted, but in fact, he acts in the interests of the aristocracy and others, trying to please everyone. For example, he leaked to everyone what food the protagonist likes and dislikes when he is a child. He almost never gets gifts, but as soon as he grows up, and they, in order to earn his trust, will come with a bunch of gifts, They will buy only what he likes. For example, it can be vegetables, fruits, or culinary delights. If they think about how to please him, they can always ask Hark about it. If you give this man some gold, he will tell you everything about the protagonist. Basically, he is a money-hungry idiot who is only happy when his pocket is full of gold coins. The throne room and the protagonist's room are designed in such a way that two walls have poor sound insulation. No one can hear from the outside due to good sound insulation, but everything can be heard inside. Steward had the privilege of entering the waiting room without permission, while others could only get inside with Hark's permission. In other words, Hark can eavesdrop on what is happening in the room at any time. Without his permission, no one can even say hello to the protagonist. That is why he always needs to pretend to be an incompetent little emperor. The protagonist sighed heavily. Yes, life is under total control. At that moment, Alexia came to the protagonist, and after greeting her son, she asked him how he was doing. The protagonist exclaimed in surprise, "Mother?" Hark was immediately indignant. She should not come to the emperor without warning. He already asked her about it. Alexia asked him in bewilderment, "Is that so? But even if so, she is the mother of the emperor, right?" She added that she just wants to see her son. Does she need to ask someone for permission to do this? Hark was embarrassed and did not know what to answer the woman. The protagonist noted with glee, "A mother always has a reason, thanks to which she can come at any time. She is a mother. How funny. This mustachioed devil does not like that he was not paid." Alexia arrogantly told Hark to leave. She has an important conversation with her son. He did not like it at all, but he gritted his teeth in anger, hissing through his teeth as she wishes, after which he left the room with dignity. The protagonist, meanwhile, was thinking, Regent Alexia, his mother in this world. She usually spends time with an admirer and rarely comes to him, to her son, her real child. Maybe she really did start to feel that something was wrong when he was used for political purposes, but wasn't it a bit late? He asked his mother what she wanted to talk to him about. Alexia told him not to trust Carl. He was up to no good. He asked her who that was, although he understood perfectly well who they were talking about. His mother answered him that it was a man called the minister. She added that this man intended to seize power in their country. The protagonist thought in bewilderment. He was a child. He shouldn't understand such things. Out loud he asked her, "Is this true?" She confirmed that it was not that simple. This man forced his aunt to marry his son by force. This is unforgivable. The protagonist became interested in this. So the crown prince had a younger sister, and she was still alive? He heard about this for the first time. He wanted to know more about it. Therefore, he answered his mother, he has an aunt, and he didn't know. The mother said that it was so. His father had two younger sisters. The first one became a princess of another country, and the second one was forced by the chancellor to marry his offspring. The woman was afraid that this terrible man wanted to get rid of him, her son. The protagonist noted with bewilderment, because he is a child, does he not need to explain anything to him? He mentally asked his mother not to dump so much information on him. Out loud, he asked her, does the chancellor want to get rid of him? Alexia answered him that this man wants his aunt, his father's sister, to take this throne. The protagonist was surprised, but he was supposed to be the new emperor. How can his aunt take his place? The mother noted that it was so, but according to the imperial law, indeed, he should become the emperor. But according to the clan law, things are different. MC was surprised. What is this clan law? Alexia began to explain the essence of this law to him. After a while, the protagonist, sitting tiredly on his bed, thought, what a nasty hag. He replayed the last minutes of the meeting with his mother in his head. Having told him about the clan law, she noted that she already had to go. The protagonist asked her upset, was she leaving already? Alexia answered him that she was. The woman added that if she stayed here too long, the minister might suspect something was wrong. The protagonist thought irritably, of course she was afraid. Let her just say that she wanted to meet her new lover as soon as possible. Her perfume carried her a mile away. Everything immediately became clear, and she was also unhappy that he had become attached to his maids. If she wanted her son to love her, then she should be a good mother, not a terrible one. And now, sitting on the bed, the protagonist noted with satisfaction that he had been able to find out what she was talking about. The empire retained two laws of succession. Long ago, there was the Empire of Lothar, and one day, the Bungarth clan decided to settle here, who later became aristocrats. Then the Lothar Empire collapsed, and power passed into the hands of the Bungarth family. The country was renamed the Family Empire. In other words, this country is the former Lothar Empire, ruled by the Bungarth clan. The family's law of succession was equal to the clan's law. The law of succession was equal to the imperial law, and somehow both exist and operate at the same time. According to the imperial law, the first man inherits the throne, and there is even a possibility for a girl to become an empress. According to the clan's law, only a man can inherit the throne. A woman cannot become an emperor. The main character rubbed his temple from tension. It was difficult for him to put everything together. He had no idea on what principle they chose the law they needed. Suddenly there was a knock on the door. The protagonist asked who was there. He allowed the knocking visitor to enter. Hark entered his room, which surprised MC very much. He asked the man if something had happened. Hark apologized to him for disturbing his rest, but there was one person who would like to meet him. Hark obsequiously asked him if he would mind. The protagonist was surprised. Who could it be? The man smiled and told him that he would know it when he saw him. The protagonist wondered in bewilderment. The person who wanted to meet him and did not say his name What was it? Although it was obvious, it was probably Carl. MC went to the door, opened it, and saw the chancellor. The minister turned to him and thanked him for coming to him. The protagonist grinned and thought he knew it. This idiot is the last one who hasn't done anything today. Carmine turned to Hark and asked him why he allowed this man to come. This man wants to kill him. Carl muttered in bewilderment. What is His Majesty saying? Let him just listen to him. But the protagonist, playing the role of a little boy, objected to this. He shouted that he did not want to listen to him. The chancellor, not understanding what was going on, noted in surprise that this was just a huge misunderstanding. The protagonist shouted even louder that he did not believe him. His mother told him everything, that he wanted to get rid of him. Silence reigned in the hall. The chancellor and Hark stood in bewilderment. Finally, Carl spoke up. This was all a big misunderstanding, because his stupid son and Lady Maria were engaged. He added, if Mrs. Maria married someone from another country, that country could conquer them. Does he understand that? And then he realized that he must act for the good of their country. His Majesty can rest assured there will be no wedding until he takes the throne. The protagonist thought, the Maria he was talking about is the younger sister of Crown Prince Jean, the protagonist's aunt. So the story of the damn old woman is just an attempt to turn him against the minister? There is a big difference between an engagement and a wedding. A wedding can really give power. Maybe his mother specifically wants to confuse him, or said so because he is a child. The protagonist became interested in how the chancellor even knows about Maria, who is supposed to ascend the throne. He learned everything too quickly. The guests came to the protagonist almost immediately. Of course, this is Hark's doing. He tried. The greedy bastard. So he overheard their conversation with his mother, supposedly neutral. He ended up on the minister's side, right? That's why he let the chancellor through without waiting for his permission. By the way, if the old woman keeps coming to him without going through the butler, the master of ceremonies, and the rest of the aristocrats will understand that they can do without his help. He doubts that he will be able to live without a huge number of bribes. He can only eat thanks to him. On the other hand, he will then fully concentrate on selling information, and he also directly asked his mother to stop contacting him. This is a brave man, Carl exclaimed with a sly smile. Does he really not understand that his mother wants to use him? Let him not let himself be deceived. As soon as she has a child from her lover, she will immediately forget about him. The protagonist thought that his mother is being criticized here. An ordinary child should at least give some reaction. He noted with disappointment that his mother tells him that she loves him. The man asked, isn't his mother currently enjoying a date with her lover? The protagonist nervously thought that he wanted to kill him. How could he say such things to a child about his mother? He replied that he understood everything. He believed him. Carl bowed his head and said that he was sincerely grateful to him for that. Then he apologized for wasting his time today. MC called out to him and asked if he was on his side. The man with the sarcasm knelt down and, putting his hands on his shoulders, replied that he was. He would always help him, and of course, he would always be on his side. The protagonist was perplexed and thought that everything was really bad here. A few days later, he thought that his mother had not visited him again. Both factions must have criticized her, but something happened instead. After some time, Help called out to the protagonist and said that he would like to introduce him to someone. He replied in confusion, "Let them come in." The man clapped his hands and pointed. "Let the ladies come in." Alicia Solman and Kara Knightley, the new maids, entered the room. The girls said that they would be taking care of him from now on behalf of the Regent lady. They bowed their heads and remarked that they were glad to meet him. MC was perplexed to think that he was assigned 2 maids from his mother. Oh, these policies. After a while, he thought that 5 years had passed since his reincarnation. In recent days, all he does is meet nobles. Most of them introduce him to their daughters about his age. In short, one of them is a potential bride. By the way, he wonders if he will have the right to choose? Well, it seems that the girls do not like him much. One day, more nobles came to him. The girl Angie, seeing him, pressed herself against her father in disgust. He exclaimed with displeasure that this was rude to his majesty. The protagonist replied that there was nothing wrong with that. He understands her anxiety. He thought about the fact that he doesn't do any sports and hardly moves. Every day he eats fatty foods, and naturally, he has gained weight. In addition, all the food is checked for poison, and by the time he eats it, it has already cooled down and completely lost its taste. Well, there is also an advantage in gaining weight for him. The adults around him are letting down their guard, and he can benefit from this. True, this means that he will have to give up the harem life in the other world, but he does not regret it one bit. By the way, most of the aristocrats he met were men. It seems that in this world, men are clearly superior. A few female aristocrats did come to him, and all of them were excellent magicians. Most of the wizards in this world are aristocrats, which is logical if you consider how aristocracies arise in principle. The first aristocrats were those who proved themselves in battle, and in this world, mastering magic means the ability to fight. Mages were almost the strongest soldiers in the army. As a result, almost all magicians became aristocrats, and their descendants retained this status. Although one should not miss the possibility that magical talent is inherited, then the idea of male superiority may not exist, but instead, the superiority of magic. But he was going to hide the fact that he can use magic. If he does not use magic, then he has no right to be called an aristocrat. If such thinking is widespread in society, then on the contrary, they can get rid of him. He will need to carefully test the waters. After some time at night, the protagonist thought that he meets with aristocrats day after day and listens to the nonsense of both grandfathers. He pretends to be an obedient child and eats cold food. But he learned to better manage heat and improved his telekinesis skills. He learned to use telekinesis well. In addition, he created a new spell of invisible barrier, something like a small shield. He doesn't know how strong the shield is, because he has no way to check it, but the thought that he has at least some means of protection is very encouraging to him. He also learned healing magic. So far, he can only heal small scratches and cuts, but the fact that he can do it already makes him happy. He can focus on developing magic that can be used to escape. In his past life, magic did not exist at all, and he likes that he can explore something previously unknown to him. By the way, he learned another useful spell. The protagonist approached the maid and began to wipe his eyes with a sad face. She asked excitedly, did he need something? Did he really want a hug? When the girl hugged him, MC used a forced sleep spell and put her to sleep, and then thought that, of course, his maids sleep a lot in principle. But if he puts them to sleep with magic, he will be more sure that they will not suddenly wake up. Magic in this world won't activate unless he can imagine it, and without full knowledge, nothing will work. He doesn't really have a handle on water magic yet. Although it's not very effective, it's good that he can at least do something with it, but there's been no progress with invisibility and spatial manipulation magic. He can't even imagine how it should work, and there are probably laws and restrictions in this world that he doesn't know about yet. When he escapes from here, he'll definitely enjoy learning magic. There are still many obstacles, but he definitely has a chance to escape. This thought gave him courage and determination and gave him hope. It's time for him to stop thinking about the future and practice. Defense, healing, and stealth are the three main types of magic he's currently learning. It would be nice to add some detection magic here. He'll need it to detect guards while escaping. It would be ideal to learn how to detect through walls. First, he should try making something like an ultrasonic wave. MC snapped his finger and tried to create a wave, but after failing, he thought that nothing worked because the room had anti-magic measures. But he had an ace up his sleeve. He used a pose with his hands and began to call on heat magic. Covered in an aura of heat, the protagonist happily thought that with this spell, he was able to see his magic power. This trick is done by absorbing heat from surrounding light sources. He was able to do this thanks to heat manipulation magic. It can absorb more heat from places where the temperature is higher and from places where the temperature is lower. Almost no heat is absorbed. The local barrier from magic will not stop it, because heat is not a magical power. If he continues to pour in magic power little by little, nothing will stop him. This way, he will be able to detect other heat sources, and then he only needs to imagine what is there. Time to project onto the retina. The protagonist looked at the sleeping maid, and seeing her translucent, thought with a smile that it worked difficultly. But it seemed to him that there were no problems. His long training was not in vain, and now it was time for him to move on. With the help of heat magic, he captures the heat source, and then, using the power of thought, he projects the source directly onto his eyes with magic. This is how he can see, so if he senses heat sources behind the wall, he will be able to see through walls. Before, he only failed miserably, but today he will cope. He needs to concentrate. MC used his skill and saw the outline of two guards standing behind the door. He happily thought that he did it. This is a success. He clearly sees two guards at the door. Now his heat magic has turned into heat detection magic. Now he has defense, healing, and stealth magic, as well as detection magic. All four necessary types of magic are ready. Suddenly, the protagonist looked at the ceiling and noticed the outline of an unknown man, and then he thought in fear that there was someone there. There is no second floor here. This means that he is sitting under the roof. He has no idea whether it is a killer or another guard, but both are bad. Is it a killer or just an observer? And how long has he been sitting there? He practiced magic in this room every day and he could see it. If he saw all this, then he must have been transmitting information that he was doing shamanism here. If you think about it, no one in this room except him used magic. What if no one in this room can use magic at all, and it turns out that he has a special talent? What if he is considered special? Things are bad. They can get rid of him. Maybe he should try to attack first, but he does not think that this will work or somehow improve the situation. What should he do? Now he will definitely not be able to sleep. After a while, MC thought that for all the following days he was in the same place. Who his master is and what goals he is pursuing, he cannot discard the fact that he wants to kill him. Severe stress, fear, and insomnia greatly affected his health and appearance. On the morning of the third day, he vomited and lost consciousness. After 3 weeks, the main character exclaimed in displeasure that he said that everything was fine. Helka called out to him excitedly, but he continued to shout that it had been so long since he had passed out. Even a fool could see that he was fine now. They were bothering him, so they should go away. The maids and the nurse were standing next to them. Everyone bowed down and agreed with him right after his words. MC thought that it wasn't poison. Since that morning, many were afraid that someone had tried to poison him, Every day, he was visited by a bunch of different adults, but the real reason why he passed out was the one sitting upstairs, and today he was there. He tried for a long time to understand who he was, but he still couldn't find any answers. In the end, he decided that it was better to just give up. Most likely, there were several of them up there, and they changed every day. That's why he felt like he was constantly being watched. To kill him, they would most likely send someone who owned magic better than him. It seemed that he could discard the thought that this was a killer. The two old men probably don't know that he can use magic. The maids probably haven't noticed either. He has no idea what they do there every day. It's bad to know that he's always under surveillance, but it was officially declared poisoning, so the amount of food and portion sizes were reduced. Because of this, he got back into shape. Being overweight is bad for your health. Maybe because he lost weight, but the daughters of the aristocrats now look at him like predators. Their lustful aura seriously scares him. But one of them is different. It's the daughter of the Duke of Varn, the prickly Duchess Nadine Devarn. She's the only one who still looks at him with disdain. After a while, the girl herself, seeing the protagonist, exclaimed with displeasure, "Let him listen carefully to her dad," he asked with a smile. "And she came here to tell him this?" She nervously shouted, "Let him not act smart." The protagonist thought that teasing her had become his little hobby. Richard Devarn himself, Duke of the Varn Empire, stroked the girl's head and told her to stop it. "You can't talk to His Majesty like that." She immediately calmed down and agreed. He added with a smile that he apologized to him. She was not the most obedient child. MC replied with a smile that there was nothing wrong with that. He thought that he was much more interested in her father. He was from the neutral nobility. He held the position of an imperial general in the war that happened shortly before he was born. He took responsibility for the death of his father, so he was stripped of the rank of general until he escapes neutral nobility, especially if we are talking about a former imperial general. By the way, a scar on such a beautiful face, he is probably popular, and his daughter loves him very much. Suddenly, Geoffrey de Nimbal, Count and Minister of Finance, entered the room. The protagonist, seeing him, thought that this was another important figure in the neutral nobility. He looks older than his age and is already balding. As the Minister of Finance, he is the one trying to hold on to the empire's finances, which are becoming less and less every year. He is one of those he is absolutely sure of, that he will not abruptly take any side. Money is needed for everything in their world, and politics is no exception. If the person in charge of finance joins one of the sides, the balance of power will noticeably change. Therefore, both old men are clearly putting a lot of pressure on him. Let Geoffrey hold on while he is a child. He can't help him in any way. And recently, his attention was drawn to another person. Alfred Le Wadet, Count of the Palatinate, entered the room. MC thought that it seemed to him that he said that he would take the side of the one who puts the crown on the head of the emperor. He said almost nothing about himself, but judging by what he heard from others, he is in charge of intelligence, which means he might be the master of those watchers. It's best not to ask the maids or anyone else about him. That's why he wants to get close to him in person to find out more. The protagonist exclaimed his name in admiration and exclaimed that he knew he didn't have any work. Alfred knelt down with a smile and replied with a smile that he did have a job. MC was puzzled to think that he was just laughing. He's not very talkative or emotional. It would be hard to expose him. He expected nothing less from the head of intelligence. He doesn't see his intentions at all. He'll have to somehow trick his eyes when he runs away. But for now, he'll have to wait. The next day, he was brought to the reception room for the first time. The protagonist, entering the office, thought that he had never been in this room before. The decor was more luxurious than the room they usually used. Was this some kind of reception room for guests? He turned to Helk and asked if they had a meeting with aristocrats today. He replied that he had a meeting with people from the Velvy Kingdom. He asked him to sit down and wait a bit. MC sat down thoughtfully and thought that usually everything happened only within their country. Maybe he would soon be able to go out into the world, and lately, he only sees old people. Maybe there will be something interesting. A maid came up to him and poured a cup of tea. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. The protagonist said with a smile, "Let the person come in." Helk introduced her. This is the first princess of the kingdom of Velvy, Lady Rosalia von Schroenier-Cruveyer. A girl entered the room, and he thought that in 5 years of a stormy life in the palace, where he saw the same thing, he saw something like this for the first time. This is a person who combines beauty and pure innocence. She introduced herself with a smile and said that she was glad to meet him. MC wondered in confusion. Was he really tense? No, maybe he was afraid? Was he really afraid of such a small and cute girl? And by the way, where was Velvy's kingdom anyway? And what was their relationship with them? He didn't know anything about it. It could very well be a diplomatic move by one of the grandfathers, which meant it was another political trick. But why exactly did they bring her here? The emperor in the power of the nobility. It would be bad if he had such a reputation in other countries. And she was also the first princess, right? Was this really for an engagement? Did they want to solve some diplomatic problems? He didn't know, so he would live and see. Helka approached him and called out to him. The protagonist agreed with a smile and, introducing himself, exclaimed that he liked her. Let her be his companion. Everyone present was in complete shock. The servant excitedly noted that at his age, marriage was still impossible. He replied, Let him do something similar then, Rosalia asked in complete shock. Is he talking about an engagement? The protagonist agreed and added that he thought it was all good. Couldn't that be arranged too? Helk excitedly replied that it wasn't that easy. He interrupted him and shouted, since there was nothing to stop him, let him arrange everything quickly. The servant immediately ran out of the office excitedly and ran to carry out the order. The maids, watching this, also ran after him to organize the engagement. MC thought that the maids also ran to report. Apparently, both factions did not expect his decision. He pointed to the sofa, offering to sit down, and asked what kind of place this Velvy kingdom was. Would she tell him? The girl answered with a smile that she would do it with pleasure. After a while, the protagonist thought that back then, he could not help but notice that she never spoke of the kingdom as her home. She didn't treat it as her homeland. Rosalia told her that she had once been on the flagship of the fleet of the kingdom of Berby. Jordi Sadelson, the captain of the royal guard of the kingdom of Berby, approached her and smiled, and noted that he understood that they were not at home now, but it was her birthday anyway, so he congratulated her. Rosalia replied that it meant that she left her country at the age of 7. The guy was upset that she was still a child. She was not even allowed to celebrate her birthday, and she met this day on the open sea. He smiled and said that, even though there were few of them, the entire delegation would make sure that she had a good time on her birthday. Rosalia smiled and thanked him. Jordi pointed to the side and said that they were almost done preparing everything, that she should find a comfortable place. She replied that she wanted to stay here for a while longer. The sea breeze helped her to organize her thoughts. The captain of the royal guard agreed and pointed out that she should call him if she needed anything. She was sailing on a ship because of her homeland. The kingdom of Berby, where she was born, is a country that is located in the northwest of the continent called the Eastern Continent. This kingdom prospered when it was part of the Lothar Empire. They were essentially a vassal state. The Berb were never proud of their position, but it was for the sake of peace, so they resigned themselves to their position. But such a peace would collapse sooner or later. In the year 460 of the new era, in the kingdom of Berb, in the capital of Clulia, the king of the kingdom of Berby, Alexei van Chalongier Cluve, furiously slammed the table and exclaimed, "These are stupid fanatics." The servant replied, "Let him calm down." Another village was plundered as a result of the attack of Thomas Asanaki. He, sitting on the throne, asked, "Is it really this again?" The Eastern Continent is the place where the Kingdom of Berb and the Empire of Bungarth exist. The religion practiced in many countries of this continent is called the Holy Church. Thomas Asanaki is one of the sects of this Holy Church. It is a sect of ardent fanatics who are ready to shed blood. After the death of Ain, this sect quickly gained power, and literally in the blink of an eye, they grabbed weapons. The center of their teaching was the return of Ain, and that they must prepare the Eastern Continent for this. And on the territory of the Kingdom of Berby is the Promised Land. And it so happened that it is not far from the capital of Clulia. That is why the confrontation broke out between them. Everything would be simple if there was only one sect. They would unite with other sects of this confession, who also believe in the Promised Land. Having united, they created the faction Heritage. They became a force to be reckoned with. There are many sects in the Holy Church, and it so happened that the evil sects were widespread in the regions near which people from the ship landed. Saint Ain said that he does not accept these teachings, and, as a ruler, he orders to seize them. So it is written in the Holy Scripture. There is a historical fact that people already lived on these lands, and Ain tried to subjugate them when he landed on the continent. But this had nothing to do with their beliefs. Everything happened because they needed the technology of the people from this continent. The technology of the old continent was in many ways behind that of the Eastern Continent. Among the Ain colonists, there were craftsmen who were able to master their technology. All modern historians say that the reason for the growth of the Holy Church was that the craftsmen were adherents of the teaching. Others call it a conflict, saying that the teaching was recognized as heresy on the Western continent. So many fled here. But one way or another, it turned out that the Kingdom of Berby was called the Kingdom of Evil in the scriptures, saying that they took the Promised Land for themselves. In fact, the kingdom itself was supposedly built by those who drove the Ain settlers out of these lands. But the modern Kingdom of Berb has nothing in common with its ancestors. Of course, the Kingdom of Berby is not going to leave things like this. In order to avoid conflicts, the kingdom first established the Holy Church as the state religion, and then, when they got closer to the empire, they replaced it with the Western teaching, and so everything went wrong, and the empire fell apart. As a result, the Heritage faction was completely angry. This is a country that resigned itself to the status of a vassal state in order to avoid war. And on the other side, religious fanatics who are ready to become martyrs. The battles between them were one-sided. For the pagan believers, they are unfortunate people who have not yet learned the true faith, and heretics are fallen people enchanted by the devil. In other words, there will be no punishment for killing them. They called their campaign against the pagans a holy war and attacked every village and city. They exterminated, burned, and plundered. Thomas Asanaki, who was previously in the minority, created his own nation and named it after himself, and his military power far exceeded the power of the kingdom of Berby. One day, politicians came to Rosalia and began to report that Thomas Asanaki had again been devastated by one of their large farms. They now have even less supplies for the people. This will be their last winter, and there is nothing they can do. They began to argue among themselves about whether they should accept someone from the imperial family into the royal family, but nothing came of it. 100 years ago, the Bungarth Empire remained neutral. Maybe they should directly ask the empire for help? Another politician replied that they were too far away. Let him come up with a more realistic idea. Rosalia noted with displeasure that they were shouting but could not come up with anything. She got up from her chair and called out to Alexei. He happily exclaimed that they did not care what anyone thought of them. They would ask everyone for help in turn, and they would not stop until they found an ally. He asked her for help. The girl with a serious face replied that he should rely on her. After some time on the ship, she thought that the Holy War had not ended for 200 years. But the kingdom of Berby would be able to survive. She will definitely return home with success. After some time, they arrived in the imperial capital of Cardinal. Jordice, sitting in the carriage, was surprised to note that it was even more beautiful here than he had heard. Rosalia happily agreed and thought that the empire could have the power to save her country. The girl continued to tell that a few days later, they had great hopes for the imperial capital of Cardinal, but they were never able to meet with the most authoritative dukes of the empire, and all desperate appeals to aristocrats from different factions were simply rejected. Jordice called out to her and said that it was probably time for them to go to the next country. They had a long road to the kingdom of Hismafe. Maybe they would listen to them there. Rosalia thought sadly that this was, of course, possible, but Hismafe was currently at odds with the neighboring empire of Teva. If they really agreed to help them, would they have enough strength for it? She agreed and added that before leaving this country, she would like to meet the emperor. Was there such a possibility? He was about the same height as her, but he held such a high position. Was it impossible? Jordice replied that, considering that she was also a royal person, they should be granted an audience. But one of the representatives of the kingdom asked why not. Even if they could not get help, they would receive important information about their young emperor. From a diplomatic point of view, it was always better to have more important topics. Another thoughtfully noted that even if they did not get help, they would still receive useful information for their future negotiations. Rosalia replied with a smile that then everything was decided. Their fate would be in the hands of the emperor. Everyone immediately agreed with her. After a while, they came to the protagonist's office. Helk introduced himself and noted that he was meeting her for the first time. Well, it was time for them to go. Jordice also tried to pass happily, but the man stopped him and warned that the princess was the only one who would be granted an audience. He nervously exclaimed that he was a guard of the royal family. Rosalia replied with a serious face that everything was fine. They were already taking up the emperor's precious time, so they could not ask for more. Let him take her to him. Helk thanked her and began to lead her down the corridor. She thought that she had been granted an audience, but this servant was a guard dog. If she immediately told the emperor about the state of their country and why she had come, Helk would immediately throw her out. So, should she do? How selfish she was. Even though it was for the sake of saving her homeland, she was still trying to take advantage of a boy who was younger than her. From the point of view of those around her, she was definitely considered petty and despicable. Helk walked her to the door and, pointing with his hand, said that they needed to go here. Rosalia, with a serious face, thought that she needed to get ready. For the sake of her father and the Berby kingdom, she didn't care what anyone said. The girl had already entered the office and introduced herself to the protagonist. She wondered in surprise, were these really the eyes of a child? He had the eyes of an experienced man or a wise elder. He greeted her and joyfully exclaimed that he liked her. Let her be his wife. This was a real surprise for Rosalius and the delegation of the Berby kingdom. Until this moment, neither the minister nor the master of ceremonies had reacted to the problem of the Berby kingdom. They were simply waiting for them to leave their country themselves when they realized that no one would help them. You can't expect much in return from a country that is on the verge of extinction. Both of them did not want to waste money and resources on this useless matter for the country. But due to the whim of the puppet emperor, an engagement proposal was made. And for them, it meant that the emperor had a wish, and whoever fulfilled the emperor's wish would become the closest to him. In this way, they could become the one who would actually be in power. Even if they did not really want to help, they would have to do so in order to get ahead of each other. Later, they both declared that they were serious about the emperor's wish. They would discuss the emperor's engagement and begin to solve the problem of the Berby kingdom. Rosalia wondered that their representatives had visited other countries, asking for support. Why did the emperor decide to help the Berby kingdom? Perhaps their engagement could be the reason. In addition, several other countries agreed to support them. When the royal fleet returned to the Berby kingdom, the season had already changed and winter had arrived. By that time, the situation in the kingdom had changed dramatically. Rosalia happily told Alexei everything and added that this was the result of their mission. He replied that she had tried hard. However, He did not think that the emperor would agree so easily. The girl thought that with the support, the people would be able to survive the harsh winter. And they also managed to reclaim the previously lost cities. She asked that their kingdom was saved by their joint efforts, so why was he not happy? The man replied that they were alone here. Let her stop pushing these formalities. Naturally, their kingdom was saved, and he was happy about this news. However, people say, the princess met the emperor for the first time. They just met, and they already announced their engagement. He is a little worried about these rumors. He heard that the current emperor is just a stupid puppet. If only their kingdom did not have so many problems. In general, he is worried, both as a king and as a father. Let her forgive him. She did not need to agree to the engagement. Although they are about the same age, he is 2 years younger than her. She should not have made such a sacrifice. Rosalia thought, did he call the emperor a stupid puppet? No. Everything they say about him is not true. His very appearance and aura, and those eyes. He has such mysterious eyes, hiding many secrets. She can't even believe that he is younger than her. She is sure that he will be able to rule the country. No, even the whole world. She objected that he is wrong. She is sure that Emperor Carmine will become a great man, and she will be the one who will always support him. Alexei, perplexed, asked if she would change her mind about the engagement. Rosalia answered that she cannot. If she breaks the promise she made, it can greatly affect their authority. Besides, as the princess of this kingdom, she must fulfill her duties. The man burst into tears and noted that she cares very much about their kingdom. The girl excitedly exclaimed, let him stop crying. At that moment, Johanna Westbury, Queen of Berby and Rosalia's mother, entered the room. The girl happily hugged her mother. She smiled and remarked that she had done a great job. She had also grown a little. Rosalia asked in surprise, was that true? Her mother happily agreed and asked if she would tell her about her engagement. She excitedly stopped her and asked what she was saying. Johanna smiled and said that she should stop pretending to be an adult. Should she tell her what she had learned about love? The girl blushed deeply and asked what she wanted to hear. She was doing her duty by taking care of the kingdom. The woman smiled and said that she understood everything. She started pushing her and exclaimed that her father was waiting for her. Rosalia thought that thanks to Carmine, her kingdom was saved. And this time she would be helping him. As a wife and as a princess, let him take care of himself, because they will see each other again soon. After some time, Balthazar Sibiar, a member of the royal guard, thought that in this country, which is ruled by ordinary puppets, the duty of a guardsman has become an ordinary show. Where will honor and pride come from? If one day a man appears who can lead the country to greatness, it will not be a sin to give his life for him, to protect the son of their empire at the cost of his own life. He thought that this was the greatest honor. Sometime later, in the tavern Goose, Balthazar, being drunk, told his friends that this is what he is talking about. He is a proud imperial guardsman, and he is not going to indulge some bigwigs from another country. His drinking companion replied that they are simple people, so they do not see much difference. The other agreed with a smile and added that ordinary soldiers do not understand such things. Balthazar nervously exclaimed that he has already explained it to them many times. The position of an imperial guard is a post that has not changed since the time of the Lothar Empire. It is an honorable branch of the military, masterful in military affairs. However, the 6th Emperor, Edward III, sold this position. And as soon as these strangers arrived, everything changed. They can become anyone if they pay well. Now everything is for sale for money. The guy said that he should remember that this policy was abolished during the reign of Edward IV. Balthazar replied that this was nonsense. This policy still exists. Although the emperor managed to abolish it, they still could not return it to how it was. Even now, appointments to the guard are still left to Chancellor Karl. In short, this policy has not disappeared. It is just that now the chancellor is selling places in the guard. His friend nervously exclaimed, let him stop shouting. Balthazar furiously shouted, let him shut up. Because of these stupid bureaucrats, the guard has become a plaything for aristocrats. Another guy asked excitedly, could such people really protect the ruling family? Another guy asked if he had bought a place in the guards for himself too. Balthazar replied that although he came from a common family, his family had served the local viscount as squires for generations. One day, his father died in battle. At that time, the main one was just a great general. He became his squire when he was 15 years old. He desperately wanted to surpass his father, and the general noticed his efforts, so he began to try twice as hard as everyone else. The general was an imperial knight, so he often helped him maintain order in the city. His efforts paid off, and he became a guardsman, and he seemed to be asking if they could protect the ruling family. The guy agreed with interest and continued listening. Balthazar replied that he thought they couldn't. In short, these guys just bought themselves prestigious places in the guards, so they were useless in battle. Not only from him, who had real experience in combat. The imperial guard must be ready to give their lives to protect the ruling family, but because of this stupid policy. His friend asked if he didn't like it so much, maybe he should leave the guard? The second agreed and asked why he didn't return to the city guard. Balthazar replied that he had already taken the knight's oath. To get into the imperial guard, he took the oath before the Prime Minister himself. But speaking of that policy, among the government positions, one could also buy the title of Imperial Knight. This title was usually given to the children of aristocrats. However, he still didn't understand how knights differed from others. Both a guardsman and a knight are official positions and do not really depend on social status. If you take him, then he is both a guardsman and a knight. But he constantly heard from old comrades, like, he decided to become a knight? That's hilarious. Therefore, he cannot return to the guards. And in the guards, he can't compete with the rich sons of aristocrats. Suddenly, the bartender approached them and with a menacing look said that they should stop making noise. Aina, a waitress at the Goose Tavern, came up to their table and, calling out to Balthazar, noted that such talk would not lead to anything good. The previous emperor and the young prince were killed by aristocrats. Such slogans have already reached the common people. It is not even surprising, because this aristocracy is already getting on everyone's nerves. The man with a malicious smile thought that it was something like that. He closely communicates with some aristocrats and understands what is being discussed. Rumors that the emperor and his son were killed by aristocrats are known to everyone in the empire. Knowing the nobles of the imperial capital, he is not surprised if these rumors turn out to be true. But how does everyone know about this? As if someone is deliberately spreading such rumors. Aina called out to him and asked if he would participate in the upcoming parade. Balthazar answered in bewilderment that he most likely would. She asked delightedly, so he would see the emperor himself? One of the guys noted with a smile that he had heard that the emperor was just a baby. He hoped that he would look like the late emperor. Balthazar replied that this kid was only 5 years old. He was still wet behind the ears. Most likely, he was just a puppet in the hands of the aristocracy. The girl asked discontentedly, why was he saying that? Another one noted with a smile that he had heard that the guards had met with the emperor himself. He wondered why they were doing that. Balthazar sheepishly replied that they were looking for a small dog. They immediately burst out laughing and exclaimed, this is the only job that suits this idiot. Here it is, the Great Imperial Guard. Balthazar slammed the table angrily and exclaimed, let them shut up. It doesn't matter what it is. He is ready to carry out any order for the glory of the Imperial Guards. The bartender came up to them and terrifyingly said that if they let out another scream, they will fly out of here. After a while, they went outside with lumps on their heads. Balthazar, setting off, thought about this damn job again. After a while, MC thought that it was not worth it. Although, maybe this is a new life. True, an ordinary life. It is not bad to be a person. A very ordinary person. If he does not have a special talent, you can enjoy a quiet life. To be born into a loving family, to graduate from school and get a job, and that's all he needs. He has no dream to strive for. He has no reason not to die. And he has no reason to live either. He thinks that he met the end of his previous life with such thoughts. He hates it. The protagonist woke up and thought that he had a nightmare. With such thoughts, he was reborn and found himself in the body of a boy who became an emperor. He is not even allowed to go outside, not even to Norn's funeral. Today, everything is different because today is the founding of the empire. This date is held once every 50 years. It all began 150 years ago. The cardinal and the first emperor received territories near the capital from the fallen state of Lothar, and then they decided to restore the empire. When the emperor ascended the throne, he sent messengers to every corner of the country to spread the news among the people. They say that the people, eager for a quiet life, happily received this news. 50 years later, the great Emperor Edward IV held a grand celebration. Usually, the peasants are required to bow to the nobles passing by, but on this day, they can greet them with all their hearts, just like the first parade 100 years ago and the founding of the empire 150 years ago. In other words, this is a great opportunity to go outside the palace. Plus, it will greatly increase his chances of survival. The protagonist happily called out to the maid and noted that he heard that there would be a parade today. Will it start right after the ceremony? She agreed with a smile and added that first there will be a ceremony in the church. The imperial family will pray for the prosperity of the empire. And on the way to the palace, the ruling dynasty will walk through the central square, leading the parade. MC became very excited and thought that this was good, but he was a little afraid to show himself in front of so many people. After a while, they got into the carriage and set off. First, they prayed for the prosperity of the empire, and then went on their way. After some time, Balthazar, seeing the carriage, noted that it was the emperor's carriage. His colleague replied that he had heard that such carriages could not be penetrated by magic or bullets. They were completely protected. He wondered in bewilderment, why would he need them then? Although there are rumors that they have invented a new gun that can easily penetrate steel. If something like that appears, they will probably use people as a human shield. Oh, how he does not want to. And what is he doing here? Suddenly, the regiment commander approached him and asked if he was counting crows on such an important day. Balthazar immediately stood up excitedly and asked what brought him here. The man grinned and replied that the royal guard had appeared here. He asked in bewilderment, why were they here? The commander explained that the guards corps is divided into imperial and royal, and there is constant feud between the detachments. The Royal Guards are a new unit created recently and mostly consist of the Regent's supporters. Compared to them, the Imperial Guards, they are just a bunch of weaklings. Balthazar worriedly wondered why the guards were here. They would not be able to protect the parade. He called out to him and asked if the guards would really be guarding the parade. The commander answered with a serious face that not everything. The Emperor's carriage was completely under their responsibility. The guy agreed and thought, let this kid be happy that they would be the ones guarding him. Although, what does he expect from a child? He is probably just a pawn in the dirty game of the nobility. The commander approached the guards and commanded, let them remember that he will be watching each one and giving an individual assessment. Today is an important day. They need to try. At this time, MC, sitting in the carriage, worriedly wondered what this means that they are now heading to the palace. At this time, commoners are allowed not to bow and greet nobles loudly. He looked at his shaking hand and thought about what he now understood. He lives much better than other citizens of the empire. In a country where political disputes between aristocrats constantly rage, ordinary people have a hard time, and the only one who can fix this is the emperor, that is, him. However, now he is just a child with a crown. The people have every right to hate him. If he does not change anything, they may start a rebellion, and then he will go straight to the guillotine. He is afraid. He does not want to look, does not want to hear. He cannot stand it. Let them not be angry. How pathetic he is. Having been reborn as an emperor, he understood everything perfectly, and now he is almost crying from fear. He does not even believe it. He is truly pathetic. After some time, the carriage entered the city, and all the people began to joyfully shout for the emperor. MC looked out the window in wild surprise and asked in bewilderment why they were happy. Balthazar, sitting next to him on a horse and hearing this, thought about it. Why was he asking this? He answered with a smile that people expected a lot from him. In addition, the previous ruler and the crown prince were very popular among the people. The protagonist beamed with hope and, thanking him, asked what his name was. Balthazar hesitated and said a name that was not his own. He replied that he would remember it. The protagonist sat deeper in the carriage and happily thought that he had neither strength nor talent. However, he still wanted to be special. He lacked the courage to take a step forward. In his previous life, he did not stand out in any way. It is quite normal not to want to die, and the desire to live is absolutely natural. Therefore, he thought about giving up the status of the emperor. However, hearing these voices, feeling their gazes on him, and seeing these faces, he does not want to be a simple puppet. This is his wish. Ever since he realized that he had been reborn in such a ridiculous way, time had begun to pass unnoticed. A state that was about to fall. Greedy aristocrats who knew no bounds. Ever since he was a child, he had to fear for his life. No chance. This game has an unimaginable difficulty. While the aristocracy enjoys luxury, the commoners become poorer every day. He thought that the people would direct their anger at him, but in reality, everything turned out differently. The people greeted him with smiles and hopeful eyes. They greeted him, a simple puppet of the nobles. This touched him to the depths of his soul, and he decided to become an emperor, the greatest ruler whose wisdom would be remembered for many centuries. And for this, he needed to get rid of those who had seized power into their own hands, especially the chancellor, the master of ceremonies, and the regent. They all needed to be gotten rid of, preferably at once. If he fails, he will die instantly. If even one of them survives, a conflict will break out that will split the country, and the citizens will suffer the most. Of course, if he starts acting now, nothing will come of it. That is why he can only bide his time. He will set the chancellor and regent factions at odds, and while they quarrel with each other, he will rise. If necessary, he will play the fool for years. Sometime later, at home, the protagonist called out to Helk and asked if he had arrived yet. The man replied that he thought he would arrive very soon. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. The protagonist thought that he was not like them. Alfred entered the room and asked if he had called him. He answered with a smile that he was glad he had come. Today, he was free to work again. Let the servant leave the room. When Helk left, the MC thought that Count Alfred was the main informant of the empire. In other words, he is the head of a spy organization. With such a person on your side, you can get much more reliable information than by eavesdropping on the conversations of maids and soldiers, and it is extremely important for him to get him. When they first met, he did not yet understand the whole situation. Every time he ran into him, he grabbed his hand, saying, "They have work to do," and made him do small tasks. From the outside, they looked like a selfish emperor and a count who are bored with a child. Alfred noted that, as he had mentioned earlier, he also had his own business. The protagonist used heat detection magic, and having scanned everything around, thought with a sly smile that now no one would suspect anything was wrong if he and the count were left alone. He noticed that there was no one here, so let him sit down. It seemed to him that this was their first normal dialogue. He was very grateful to him for his repeated help. The count replied that he was only doing his duty. The protagonist asked with a serious face, by the way, were his people under the ceiling? At this time, the spy, being above the ceiling, fearfully wondered if the boy had really noticed them. The protagonist, having heard sounds from above, said that everything was fine, they could stay there. Alfred was surprised that he had noticed. Everything was as he said. These were the people he had assigned next to him to guard him. He thought with a displeased face that he didn't care whether they were guards or observers. They were both untrustworthy. MC asked him what he wanted to know. What did he, As a former member of the neutral party, think about the whole situation. He heard him say that he was following the will of the crown. Was that true? The Count answered with a calm face that it was true. The protagonist asked what it meant. That if the crown ordered him to kill him, he would do so? Alfred answered that it depended on the situation. As far as he remembered, he said that he would follow her will. However, he did not say that it would be like this forever. Would he continue to follow her will, or would he change his mind tomorrow? He could not answer that question. MC nervously thought about how he was keeping the details silent, not revealing all the information at once. He was a real scoundrel. Everything was clear to him. He only showed what he wanted to show. He wanted to find out how much he knew. The protagonist asked if that meant that he would prefer to ignore him for now. He thought that now he knows that he can use magic indoors, and that is his main trump card. He must not under any circumstances antagonize people who know his secrets. The Count noted that ignoring is a bit of an incorrect word, because he follows his orders. He answered with displeasure. Let him not tell him that he does this because he is the emperor. What is the real reason? MC thought about what he said earlier, that it all depends on the situation. In other words, for him, the emperor is not a figure that should be obeyed unconditionally. Alfred answered that the reason is that he is the legitimate heir of Lothar, and their family has protected Lothar since time immemorial. The protagonist thoughtfully thought that the Lothar Empire is a great power, on the ruins of which the Bungarth Empire was formed. It turns out that the house of the Wadet Empire was close to the Lothar imperial family. He smiled and noted that this country was not ruled by the direct descendants of the Lothar imperial family, and that the country itself had a completely different name. The Count replied that all of this was nothing more than nonsense. The truth was that the Bungarth Empire was the legitimate successor to Lothar. MC thought with a serious face that he had misunderstood him from the beginning. All this time, he was interested in the successor of Lothar. This man was loyal only to the successor, not to the empire or the imperial family. And since he was Lothar's successor, he would not tell anyone that he could use magic. Everything turned out to be much simpler. The protagonist wondered if Duke Karl and Duke Philip were also Lothar's successors. Alfred replied that they were not. They were nothing more than two dukes. He asked that, in other words, he was the only successor. The Count replied that he was. MC thought that he was the type of person who lived by his faith and beliefs. He wondered if it was possible that he would no longer be considered Lothar's successor. Alfred replied that as long as he remembered his roots, it would not be a problem for him. The protagonist wondered if he could get more information about Lothar's successor out of him. The Bungarth Empire had adopted Lothar's language and culture, so he would not be a problem as long as they did not try to destroy Lothar's culture or falsify history, but there was a chance that he would get rid of him as soon as his heirs appeared. After all, it was not him that he needed, but his bloodline. As much as he would like to, he had to prepare for the worst. After all, he had decided to live as an emperor. Therefore, even if he wanted to believe him, he could not do so without guarantees. He still had questions. MC called out to him and asked why his father and the previous emperor were killed. Alfred answered with a menacing look that he was the eldest among his subordinates and family. All of the older generation had ended their lives themselves. The protagonist wondered in horror. Really? So they had decided to atone for the death of the previous emperor. Was that what he meant? He wondered that, as far as he remembered, the church did not approve of self-death, right? The Count replied that for him, protecting the Lothar family is more important than holy teachings. The protagonist nervously wondered what this meant. That for them, those who could not protect Lothar are no different from heretics. Their faith in the Lothar Empire is more like fanaticism. This man is dangerous even as an ally, but if you make him an enemy, it will be even worse. No, he was ready for this. What kind of emperor would he be if he did not understand even this? MC said with a smile that this means he does not have to wait for the coronation to ask him for help. They will take this country back from the dirty robbers and turn it into a great power worthy of the title of empire. Alfred answered with a calm face that everything would be as he wished, all for the sake of the empire. The protagonist thought that he now had an assistant, or rather, an accomplice. He wondered if he could ask him another question. If he had died during childbirth or had not been born at all, what would he have done? The Count answered that he would have slaughtered the entire line of Duke Karl and Duke Philip, and then he himself would have ended his life. The protagonist thought in bewilderment that he, too, was completely sick in the head. He had decided to become an emperor and had already acquired his first accomplice. Next, what policy would he adhere to? He needed to decide on this right away. He, too, was a man with his own desires. He would even say with ambitions. He wanted to be known in the future as a great ruler. And for the next generations, he should be remembered as an important historical figure, not a tyrant or a puppet. A wise ruler of the empire, a wise ruler for this country. If he continues to praise the ideas of pacifism and close his eyes to the interests of the country, he may become famous as a great ruler, but only from the point of view of other countries. He is the ruler of an empire. The well-being of his people must be his priority, and it does not matter how many countries he has to destroy for this. He knows the history of his original world. Even if history here is completely different, the experience of that world can become a guide for him. One of the rulers, for example, was able to build a great empire in one generation, but after his death, it fell apart. Such short-lived prosperity does not suit him. Well, compared to such a great figure, he is just an ant. Be that as it may, he will soon be 6 years old. In the palace, they constantly talk about the emperor's education. He was 4 years old then. By the way, the previous emperor began his education at the same age. Compared to him, he is already lagging behind. It is logical that aristocrats do not want to teach their puppet a lesson, but with the hype surrounding the engagement, they came to the conclusion that they could no longer leave him without an education. It seems that they are putting all their efforts into negotiating the terms of support and transporting humanitarian aid. And the neutral aristocrats have begun to resent the fact that the emperor has not received any education yet. This is a good chance to attract the neutral faction to their side. The Regent faction has declared that the Regent will take care of the emperor's education, and the chancellor insists that he himself will take care of his education. As always, these two are fighting for every advantage. All that remains for him to do is take countermeasures. It doesn't matter whether the chancellor or the Regent will take care of his education. Both sides will only teach him what is convenient for them, and if necessary, they will distort the facts. In order to rule the country, he must receive a good education. In his past life, he did not study anything related to the structure of the empire. Even one good teacher is already a worthy victory. After some time, MC noted that he will soon begin to be trained as an emperor. He was assigned the butler Helke as his history teacher, right? Alfred agreed and added that it was just as he had told him. The protagonist began to think that this count was the head of a spy network. Since he had teamed up with him, he had access to much more accurate information. He thought that he himself knew how useful he was. Whenever he had the opportunity, he played the selfish emperor in order to invite him here. He became a count for conversations. The entire top of the empire was filled with writhing snakes, and they didn't even try to hide it. No one should know about the nature of their secret meetings. The protagonist said that initially he was supposed to be taught language, mathematics, history, religion, military affairs, magic, art, self-defense, politics, and horseback riding. Only 10 subjects, right? Alfred agreed, and added that in reality, he would only study 5 of this list: language, history, religion, art, and horseback riding. The regent's people would be in charge of language and horseback riding. The chancellor would take on religion and art. History would be taught by Helk, as a representative of the neutral party. About the other subjects, they said something like, "They'll figure it out along the way." The protagonist chuckled at this and replied that it was obvious that they didn't want him to understand politics or military affairs in any way. The count, with a calm face, said that everything was correct. He noted with a smile that this was excellent. So all that's left for them to do is force Helk to give up his role and put him in his place. The story has to be told by a neutral faction, no matter who, right? The servant may act like a neutralist, but he's in cahoots with the chancellor. The count, puzzled, replied that he didn't mind, but he wasn't going to do anything about the other subjects. The MC replied that language, art, and horseback riding weren't subjects that could be distorted much, and he wasn't interested in religion at all. He replied that he understood everything. Would he need his help? The protagonist replied that he didn't. He could bet that he was interested in seeing what he could do, right? He thought that it was amazing how quickly his chance had come his way. After a while, the protagonist walked out into the hallway of the mansion. Seeing Philip and Helke together, he asked in surprise if they had become friends. The master of ceremonies greeted him and remarked that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. The MC agreed with a smile and added that it had been a long time. He had done well with the Berube kingdom back then. It was good that he had such loyal servants. He thought that this nonsense was giving him goosebumps. Philippe noted that he was very kind to him. He would continue to serve him faithfully, not sparing his old bones. The protagonist agreed with a sly smile and thought that he should kick the bucket as soon as possible, and if possible, let him take the chancellor with him. How annoying it was when he had to watch his facial expressions. He said that he wished he would visit him more often. He never saw his mother. The master of ceremonies asked in surprise, was he okay with that? The protagonist replied that he was not very happy, but he was glad that at least he came. He was told that he did not want to see him at all. Helk, hearing this, nervously called out to him. Philippe asked with a serious face, how did this happen? He replied with a smile that at least he had managed to become friends with Helk. They often communicated with him alone. The servant nervously exclaimed that it was a misunderstanding. He had done nothing wrong. MC asked menacingly, did he really want to say that he was lying? He remembered everything. After all, he himself had told him then to be careful with his mother. He remembered it very well. Philippe said disappointedly, let Helk calm down. Let the emperor just know that he believed him. MC agreed with a smile and thought that for now he could not deal with them directly. Helk was neither an enemy nor an ally for him. But now the master of ceremonies also had doubts. The doubt may not be small, but this seed will easily sprout. He noted with a smile that he hoped that they would all become good friends. The protagonist thought that in the end, doubt would grow into suspicion. It will grow and grow until it swallows them whole. The chancellor and the regent will be at each other's throats, reducing their power. And to prevent all this from escalating into a civil war, he will maintain the appearance of a puppet that they so desire. As an innocent emperor, he can pull off any trick right under their noses. A little later, the Regent faction revealed Helk's true identity and removed him from history lessons. Alfred was appointed as the new teacher. Sometime later, in the Akaikar district, in Frederick's house, the Baron and aristocrat of the Regent faction himself called out to his son and asked if he was ready. Timon agreed with a smile. He knelt down and said that he should forgive him. If their family had more power, he would be able to refuse them. The boy replied with a smile that it was okay. This was also their role. The emperor was counting on them, right? Frederick looked at him excitedly and agreed. Timon said with a smile that he would go. He sat down, went outside, got into the carriage and drove off. His father, watching from the window, thought, "May God protect this child from harm." The guy himself, sitting in the carriage with a serious face, thought, "What an emperor." At this time, the protagonist, studying together with Alfred, twitched. He asked in bewilderment, what was wrong? The protagonist answered, let him not pay attention. So he was talking about a supporter? The Count agreed and continued to tell that thanks to his actions, the Regent faction began to suspect Sir Helk of a double game, and now he is considered a supporter of the Chancellor. MC with a serious face noted that he took bribes and reported on his every move. He will get what he deserves. Alfred replied that this is true. Now the Regent faction needs to find a person who will not be connected with Helk in any way. And for this, they created a new position, supporter. The protagonist asked what kind of person this supporter was. He, holding a piece of paper in his hands, explained that his name was Timon. This year he would be 9 years old. His father was Frederick. They were aristocrats who had joined the Regent's faction. The house itself was not distinguished in any way. They did not have any special achievements either. The Baron was famous for his honesty, so those around him tended to trust him. His wife died during an epidemic. Since then he lived alone with his son. Suddenly, Alfred, reading the text, was very surprised. The protagonist, noticing this, asked what was going on. He replied that nothing like that. Let him tell him what a supporter is. MC said with a smile, let him think. Perhaps this was another audition? He had heard that he would become a poison detector. Alfred noted that in such a matter it was most reliable if the taster was similar in build to him. The protagonist said excitedly that they clearly did not agree to this themselves. He agreed and added that he had no doubt that he was a clever man. But that was not all. The follower also served as the chief escort. The MC was confused and asked if he knew what he was responsible for. Alfred agreed and explained that it was a cultural legacy from the Akikar region. Regent Alexia was from there. He asked, so what? That didn't tell him anything. So he didn't know the answer either? The Count replied that he was asking for forgiveness. Then he would get straight to the point. The position of the chief escort meant that Timon would be his favorite. The protagonist asked in shock, a favorite in the sense of comfort? He replied that was absolutely correct. The MC was confused and noted that his mother had said that she wanted him to have someone he could call a friend. Alfred replied that that was also his responsibility. However, Lady Alexia clearly understood what the role of the chief escort was and approved of the culture of sodomy. That's why she wants to prepare the person who will become his favorite in the future. The protagonist asked if both Timon's father and he himself agreed to this. Alfred replied that this was not the case. Timon is disgusted by the culture of sodomy, and his father completely understands and supports him in this. In truth, the Baron has rejected all such offers from other nobles so far. MC asked in surprise, then why? The Count replied that Lady Alexia said that the Emperor was counting on them. He thought furiously that this was the work of the damn old woman. He doesn't care who sleeps with whom, but even the imperial family has no right to belittle or force someone. The protagonist noted with disgust that he was never interested in men. She just brazenly used his name. Alfred replied that such are aristocrats who have power. Lord Akikar himself was born and raised in the capital, so he is not interested in such pleasures. The Regent grew up in the Akikar region where such behavior was the norm, so he dared to assume that this initiative was entirely hers. The protagonist thought furiously, let her not think that she could get away with this. He would definitely kill her one day. Suddenly, a maid knocked on the door and warned that Timon had arrived. The Count worriedly noted that rumors might spread. The protagonist replied with a smile that they would finish for today. Let her bring him here. He thought nervously that he was a child like him. Maybe if he pretended to know nothing, they could still get along. After a while, the supporter himself entered the room. He introduced himself and said that from today on, he would be his supporter. He would carry out any orders he gave. The protagonist also introduced himself and replied that he did not need such formalities. He saw Timon's terribly furious look and thought that the first impression could not be worse. After a while, the protagonist thought that from that moment on, the supporter continued to drill him with a murderous gaze without stopping. But he had other concerns, the beginning of his terrible education. The first is religion. This subject is taught by an aristocrat from the Chancellor's faction. Sitting in the office, the teacher with a sarcastic smile asked if he understood everything? They are the only empire in the world, and the only true faith is the Western holy teaching, and everything else is heresy. It was created only to stupefy the hearts of his subjects, and therefore the words of the great Saint George V, who is the younger brother of their chancellor, this can be considered the absolute truth. MC thought in bewilderment that this is complete garbage. Next came the drawing lesson, which the chancellor was also responsible for. She did nothing but praise the Lothar culture and slander the Akakar culture. The teacher didn't even try to be honest. For every mistake, she insulted and ridiculed Timon, and his murderous look was getting worse, but he wasn't guilty of anything. After some time, there was a linguistics lesson. The teacher was a man from the Regent faction, who turned out to be even worse. The protagonist thought that they were studying Bungarth, Sacred, Lothar, Akikar, Taboo, and Tenob languages. These 6 languages are spoken in the empire. There are too many of them, and besides them, there will also be the languages of neighboring countries. Isn't it too much to expect from a 6-year-old child? What's wrong with education in this country? Well, if he tries, then he might be able to remember something. The problem is different. A child's brain is quite flexible. MC began to talk to his teacher in another language. The man admiringly noted that this was amazing. His pronunciation is excellent. He nervously thought that he doesn't even teach him the alphabet. He has nothing to write down. The entire lesson is conducted in the style of heard, repeated, talked. Practice is good, but if he only learns like that, he will remain illiterate as he was. He can't even read anything. Judging by the history of his past world, it often happened that rulers could not read. If such a king comes across a document about illegal machinations, he simply won't be able to understand it, and this means that he will not attach much importance to it. Life among the aristocracy is hard. He needs to somehow learn to read himself. That's his next goal. Count Alfred is in charge of history. The classes held by the neutral faction are observed by representatives of the other 2 factions. This is a smart move. This way they will definitely make sure that the emperor is not told unnecessary things. So, asking the count to teach him to write will not work. It begins to irritate him. After some time, Alfred asked if he remembered the topic of the previous lesson. MC agreed, and replied that he was talking about the time before the Great Schism. The disintegrated Lothar Empire is known in history as the Guild Dynasty Lothar Empire. The empire was formed in 101 BC, and before that, it was called the Kingdom of Lothar. The period of the empire also includes the time when the country was a small kingdom. This dynasty included 20 generations of rulers, and their reign lasted 350 years. From the beginning to the middle of its existence, this country was a hegemony in the west of the Heavenly Mountains. The Heavenly Mountains are a large mountain range that runs across the entire continent from north to south. On sunny days, even from the capital, you can see these majestic mountains. If only he could go there someday. In 52 BC, the Lothar Empire recognized the holy teaching as the state religion. The reason is the state of Karnan, located in the south of the country, which also preached polytheism. An unusual situation. The dominant empire fell under the influence of a country many times weaker than itself. It was just that the holy teaching was able to penetrate the empire at the right time. Perhaps in terms of territory and development, they were stronger, but religion is an intangible thing. It is a pity that many countries continue to fall under its influence. So the great empire of Lothar changed its name to the Empire of Harbarian. With a new name, the empire flourished as the largest state on the entire eastern continent. But in the year 220, according to the new calendar, decline began. The tyranny of the chancellor led to an uprising. In 222, during the uprising, the capital was lost, which was eventually quickly returned. But this event affected the authority of the country, and the vassal countries gradually began to separate, wanting to become independent. And, as if trying to finish off the country, the Trap faction and the faction of the Holy Teaching clashed with each other, which led to a civil war. One uprising was replaced by another, and so the era of the Great Schism began. That's all. Alfred, after listening to him, remarked that this was excellent. Then they would move on to the next topic. Today, they would learn about how the Bungarth Empire was formed. MC wondered what the Lothar fan would tell about their empire. He had a bad feeling about it. The Count said with a smile that many countries had tried to grab a piece of Lothar, so he had to be careful not to confuse them. The protagonist, with a nervous face, thought that it seemed to him that it was a mistake to appoint him as a history teacher. Alfred continued to tell that in the year 248 of the new calendar, Galkion, a mercenary from Goffer, invaded the empire. This marked the fall of the Lothar Empire. In 249, shortly before the fall of the capital, the chancellor and his henchmen fled, taking the emperor's treasures with them. But this is not even the same chancellor who caused the great uprising in 220. The chancellor made his way to the fortress city of Hor, and there he ascended the throne, calling himself the true heir to the Lothar Empire. This period is called the Lothar Empire of the Feather Dynasty. At the same time, distant relatives of the imperial family of the Gil Dynasty, who managed to escape from the capital during the uprising, gathered their army. They founded their own state and called it the Lothar Empire of the post-Gil Dynasty. The blood of the rulers flowed in their veins, making them the true successors. This gave them the right to call the Lothar Empire The post-Gil dynasty defeated the Feather dynasty. The empire destroyed itself because its ruler introduced laws that in their time led to the Great Uprising. The next blow came from the Lothar Empire of the Surd Noir dynasty. This dynasty was formed from the remnants of the Feather inhabitants. Their capital was the fortress city of Hor. MC replied that he understood everything. So the Feather dynasty was able to claim the throne thanks to the treasures, and the post-Gil dynasty had the right of blood inheritance. And the Surd Noir dynasty took the Feather treasures for itself. Alfred said with a smile that everything was correct. The protagonist thought that it turns out that, from some point of view, the Surd Noir dynasty is not connected with Lothar at all. Alfred went on to explain that the Feather and Surd Noir dynasties are sometimes also called false. By the way, traitors, fugitives, thieves, and deserters are usually called fakirs, and swindlers, hypocrites, liars, and fools are called Surd Noirs. These are quite offensive nicknames. They were not the true heirs of Lothar and claimed what did not belong to them. This outcome is quite fair for them. Moreover, there is no such race as the Feather or the Surd Noir in their world. Therefore, such nicknames are not racial discrimination. They are only used for dirty criminals, so he should be more careful in using these words. MC thought, is this really his personal opinion? Did he just tell the truth? Can he really trust his words? Alfred said that they will now move on to the founding of the Bungarth Empire. First, they will look at the early years. Bungarth was originally the land of the indigenous people who lived in the territory of the current Gafor Republic. During the Gil dynasty, the Guard tribe living in the Bungarth lands received the title of viceroy for their achievements before the empire. Around the same time, other indigenous tribes were expelled from their lands by the Gafor clan. As a result, they went to Bungarth. They joined the Guard tribe and became its junior branches. These lands were on the very borders of the empire, so neither the Great Schism, nor the civil wars, nor the departure of the vassal states affected them. But they were always at war with the kingdom of Gafor, and after the fall of the Gil dynasty, they could no longer count on the empire's help. At the same time, they took on the role of protectors of the imperial family, which later led to the creation of the post-Gil dynasty. MC wondered what it meant that the emperor's relatives, who fled during the Great Uprising, hid in Bungarth. Alfred went on to explain that a marriage alliance was concluded with the people of Guard, as a result of which they received the title of Duchy, the highest title of the empire after its ruler. During the post-Gilov dynasty, the capital was moved to Odun, closer to the border. Meanwhile, the Gafor kingdom declared itself an empire. Galkian, who destroyed the Gilov dynasty, became a hero for the Gafor people. His grandson managed to get some of the Lothar treasures, after which he decided that their country had every right to be considered an empire. The protagonist wondered what it meant that Gafor also began to be called an empire after getting the treasures, and why are they all so restless? Alfred continued that the Gafor Empire claimed that they could be considered an empire due to their noble blood and laid claim to the Lothar lands. It would be more accurate to say that they invaded the Duchy of Bungarth. It was a brutal series of battles, which even drew in neighboring countries. The kingdom of Graf turned from a kingdom into an empire, and after the war, they became a republic. That is why this event is called the War of Nations. In the midst of this war, the Surd Noir dynasty attacked the post-Gil dynasty. As a response, internal rebellions began within the Bungarth house. Busy with internal disputes, the Bungarth house was unable to help the post-Gil dynasty. But some of the loyal soldiers managed to escape from the besieged capital, taking with them the imperial flag, coat of arms, imperial crown, and national seal. The regalia were delivered to Emperor Cardinal. He had Gil blood in his veins, making him the legitimate successor to the late emperor. At that time, Emperor Cardinal was busy suppressing the rebellion within his lands. Only a year later, he managed to recapture the lands of the post-Gil dynasty, after which they began an invasion of the Surd Noir lands. An official coronation was held on the Founders Hill near Hor, and the empire was renamed Bungarth. MC thought that this happened about 150 years ago. In just 1 year, he had achieved such results. Wasn't that too fast? As a member of the imperial family, he could only believe the story. But this Emperor Cardinal, it was unknown what his train of thought was really. Without careful preparation in advance, it was impossible to advance so far. So House Bungarth had betrayed House Gil? There was no mistake. Emperor Cardinal had foreseen this outcome and was waiting for the right moment. But if the Bungarth were traitors, then why did Alfred, who was so loyal to Lothar, take his side? Was he planning to kill the emperor? Or were there details he didn't know? The Count remarked that this would be the end of today's lesson. They had both done well. The protagonist nervously thought that he should somehow find out the details. At that time, Frederick thought that he was a very ordinary person. He was born the third son in the Baron's family. He could not inherit the title anyway, so he went to the capital in the hope of getting a post as a bureaucrat. Some may consider it disrespectful, but the reigns of the 6th and 7th emperors were not the best. He tried to be useful to the people, even in the hardest times. His colleagues began to speak well of him, and around the same time he met his faithful friend. She was better than him in everything, and tried to help him. His brothers died without leaving any heirs. The title of Baron passed to him, and he was forced to leave the capital. He had a son, but an epidemic took the life of his wife. Let him call him Timon. These were the last words of his wife. Naturally, so he did. For him, nothing is more important than this child, and now he has fallen into the hands of the emperor, who is known as a stupid puppet. How much longer will the god test him? A servant came to him and reported that everything was ready for departure. Frederick thanked her with a smile and added that he would soon go down. He wondered if this would be his last test. At this time, the protagonist thought that he could feel Timon's thirst for his death from here. His life was constantly in danger. If he was followed everywhere by a man with a thirst for blood, he might get used to it and stop feeling the danger. He was naive, even if he tried to establish a dialogue with him. He called out to the supporter and asked with a smile, "Is the weather nice today, right?" In response, Timon just remained silent and continued to look at him with furious rage. MC thought that this was happening day after day. This was already starting to irritate him, but today, he would put an end to it. According to the information received from the Count, his father would be the language teacher this time. After some time, they entered the office and met Frederick. He noted that he was glad to meet him in person. From today on, he would be his language teacher. They would start from where they left off. Timon, seeing him, happily said that this was his father. Frederick nervously noted that he was now the emperor's supporter. He knelt down and said that he asked him not to be angry with him. He hoped that his son was not causing him any problems. The protagonist replied that there were no problems, everything was fine. He thought that his desire to kill him was the main problem, but he couldn't say, "Let him stop." The Baron pointed to the table and indicated that they should sit down and begin the lesson. When everyone sat down, he looked at the protagonist and thought that they were calling him a stupid emperor. But it seemed that this was not entirely true. Frederick wrote sentences on the board and asked if he could read them. The MC explained that he could listen and speak, but he had not yet been taught to read and write. He looked at the other teachers and thought, "So that's it." Frederick said with a smile that he understood everything. Then from that day on, they would study reading and writing. Suddenly, Elijah the Lord stopped him and asked if it was too early for the emperor to study this. Their job was to help him become a great ruler, and they, as teachers, should not burden him with unnecessary workload. The Baron replied that he had absolutely nothing to worry about. After all, the emperor already knew the basics of all 6 languages of their country. His Majesty was extremely talented. It was probably due to his previous teacher. And a mediocre person like him could only teach him reading and writing. Ilya thought with displeasure that he wanted to destroy all the fruits of his hard work. Their goal was to leave the emperor illiterate. Carmine smiled awkwardly and said that he just wanted to learn something new and was counting on him. Frederick turned to Ilya and asked, "Did he hear His Majesty?" The protagonist thought in bewilderment, "Will everything really be okay with the Baron?" Ilya leaned towards Frederick and asked, "The palace doesn't often favor servants with such an attitude. Does he agree?" Carmine thought happily that now he would be able to learn the letters. When he learns to read, he will be able to receive information not only from oral sources, but also from books. He looked at Timon and mentally said that he forgives him. His father was worth all his suffering. According to the protagonist, learning the alphabet is going smoothly, but the harder he studies, the more suspicions he will arouse. I wish he could read a book, but he will have to wait. After the Baron became his teacher, the monotony of the rest of the classes became even more tiring. In his opinion, it is all a waste of time, so he often ran away from them. Teachers often change, and the aristocrats also try to teach him facts that are convenient for them. It is unlikely that anyone will be able to tame the selfish emperor. Thanks to this, he became a fan of horse riding, although he is allowed to ride only within the palace itself, and is always accompanied by the aristocrat's guard dog. Carmine thought that at least he can see the surroundings of the mansion. He looked ahead questioningly and turning to Hubert, asked who this old man was. He introduced himself, and the protagonist asked what kind of tower this was. Hubert asked, "Is he talking about this tower? An innocent maiden is imprisoned at this." The protagonist thought with displeasure that it must have something to do with Regent. He was talking about such horror, and even smiling. Hubert said that her name was Sylvie, the daughter of Count Shemon, who was the concubine of His Majesty's father. Carmine said sadly that he seemed to have heard of her and thought that the funeral was an unforgettable story. More precisely, a story that he should never forget. With her birth, Regent took power into her hands, and on that day, Vera was imprisoned and has been there ever since. Hubert noted that this must have been facilitated by Lady Norn. The protagonist asked in surprise, "Alman?" He agreed. He and they were distant relatives, and it hurt him to realize that his family was capable of such a thing. That is why he cannot help but worry about Vera Silva. The protagonist thought that he would not have remembered her if he had not asked, and said that he felt sorry for her. Hubert smiled and asked in surprise, "Does that mean he agrees with him?" Carmine clenched his teeth in displeasure and thought, he may be a child, but you can't put your emotions on display so obviously. He can see how he can't wait to screw over the Regent some more. The protagonist said that he was in a bad mood and suggested that he go back. He looked at the tower and mentally said, it couldn't be worse. He was angry with the Regent, and this political battle was angry. And what's more important, he was angry with his impotence, because he couldn't help even one girl. Meanwhile, in class, according to Carmine, lately history lessons were becoming more and more boring. Not that it was the Count's fault. There is a so-called taboo. It is different for everyone, depending on the person's position and status. In his opinion, the aristocrats came up with this rule only to make their lives easier. A rule for raising stupid puppets that are easy to control. Reading and writing, knowledge of military affairs, studying martial arts and magic, hone the skills of the emperor, and do not forget about the meetings of the emperor with the people. Anything that is uncomfortable for them immediately becomes a taboo and forbidden knowledge. One cannot even dream of a good level of education. He is not very interested in the achievements of past emperors, but because of this taboo, he is told only about good deeds. Now they have moved from the first emperor straight to the third, Cardinal, the first emperor of Bungarth. He himself has heard this story more than once, a famous monarch known throughout the country. Because of his achievement, even commoners do not dare to name their children after him. It is considered disrespectful. In stories, he is described as a supreme being who cannot be approached. It seems that he was an excellent strategist, and in a year, he managed to reclaim all the lands of the post-Guild dynasty. After that, they moved to Howl, the capital of the ceremonies. The hill that existed on the border of the Cardinal Emperor's lands was called the Founder's Hill, and having announced this, the Emperor left the front. This marked the beginning of the founding ceremony. When it became clear that the Emperor had left for the capital, Ceremonies sent all his troops to attack in the hopes of delivering a crushing blow. Upon learning of this, the Cardinal immediately moved to help the troops, first to show himself on the battlefield, and then suddenly leave, but clearly provoked Ceremonies to attack. Carmine said that the Cardinal Emperor was amazing. The teacher agreed. He showed himself brilliantly. However, he was good not only in military affairs. The Lothar Empire at one time split into 5 independent states. It took 9 years to unify them. They say that on the battlefield, he was completely invincible. That is why he is the founding emperor. The protagonist thought in bewilderment, too obvious pressure, but something tells him, as if the emperor had a trump card that they just do not want to tell him about. It will be necessary to study his biography more thoroughly later. The great project to restore Lothar also included the conquest of the kingdoms of Akikar and Tanabe. But the invincible commander was broken by an enemy he did not expect, illness. The emperor died without completing his plan. The second emperor was the heavyset Edward I. He was the eldest son of Cardinal and continued his father's work, annexing Akikar to the empire. He, in turn, died when he was 36 years old, and before his death managed to complete the construction of the capital of Cardinal. The happy Emperor Charles I, the younger brother of the second emperor during his reign, was able to repel the invasion of the Kafur people. So these are his achievements. Carmine thought boredly, too briefly. It is immediately obvious that all the inconvenient parts of his biography are skipped, and no one even tries to hide it. Count Woad. Is he trying to point out his taboos? The Count tries to help him as much as he can, and even makes him take notes on these boring activities. Voted said that he would remember better if he wrote it down, and these observers had nothing to say in response. But it was Baron Frederick who taught him to write, not the palace or the local aristocracy. Thanks to him, he can finally read and write. The protagonist wrote everything down on paper and thought that he didn't know what he was thinking, but it was amazing. With reading and writing, he would be able to expand his knowledge, despite all the attempts of the nobles to stop him. It must be admitted that he slightly hates this whole aristocracy. The protagonist called out to Frederick, and he asked what majesty was. He asked where the spherical one came from. Frederick replied that it was another designation for round cheese. This term is often found in the Holy Scriptures. Did he really not know? Carmine asked Timon if he knew about it. He agreed, because his father told him. The protagonist thought that he was so good in front of his father. Frederick closed the book and said, "This is one of those topics that they must know, then this is what they are talking about today." What did His Majesty learn in religion classes? He thought about it. He often runs away from them than does, and awkwardly answered that the main principle is to adhere to the teachings of God left by Ein, and the Western school is the main religion. Frederick thought about it, and then noted that they will start with the teachings of God. This is a collection of the rise of Saint Ein and his students, compiled a list of sayings. This is the Holy Scripture. Among these sayings, he can find the one that says that the world is round. The protagonist thought in bewilderment, is this serious? Surprisingly, does this mean that gravity and the rotation of the planets are already known in this world? Frederick asked. It seems he quickly understood the essence, and does he know about the seas and ships? Carmine smiled and agreed. He had never seen it, but he imagines what it is. He smiled and said, having received the revelation of the oracle, Saint Ein and his followers set off on a sea voyage. The protagonist thought that this was not the story that was mentioned at the funeral. In those days, people believed that the world was flat and there was nothing beyond the sea. Feeling the anxiety of his people, Saint Ein told them to look around. Their continent was nowhere to be seen, and all because the planet was round. Carmine thought, the horizon line? It seems that something similar happened in ancient Greece, and the theory of a round world was widespread among the scientists of that time. The story has not ended, and the divine power has made their world endless, as long as they maintain faith, Misfortunes are not terrible for them, the protagonist thought, so he attributed a scientific fact to the merits of God in the New World, New Religions. Frederick asked, the holy teaching was divided into several schools. Does His Majesty know about these schools? The protagonist replied that they only studied the Western school. He said, then they will immediately consider the history of these schools and their differences. Initially, the continent promoted the ideas of the unnamed light. Several schools of the holy teaching still adhere to this idea. To shorten the Baron's story, after the death of Saint Ain, the teachings were divided into 3 schools: the School of the Emperor, the School of Heritage, and the School of the Keepers of Knowledge. On the continent, there is a large mountain range running from north to south. The holy teaching originated in the countries to the east of the mountain range. The Empire of Taiva adhered to the basis of the teaching. Later, the empire became a sacred land, protected by Saint Ain himself, and the official religion was the Emperor's school. According to its teachings, on the day of the end, only the empire would survive, as it was sacred land. The empire actively sponsored the creation of temples and places of pilgrimage, and every day the number of believers only increased. The Heritage School believed that the sacred land was the place where Saint Ain landed on his ship. The man shrugged and asked, but did the Holy Scripture mention the end of the world? Another answered, that no one said that one should pray in a temple. There was a school of knowledge keepers who doubted the correctness of the interpretation of the Holy Scripture and constantly argued. Carmine thought that religion changes over time, so where did the term Holy Scripture come from, and who was the first to doubt the interpretation of Saint Ain's words? He believed that they would never know. As time passed, new schools began to appear. The reformists from the Emperor's School and the doubters of the Keepers of Knowledge School united together. The School of Holy Truth spread its teachings to countries at odds with the Empire, and a split occurred in the School of Heritage as well. The fundamentalists decided to separate and created the School of Return. Initially, the official religion of the Lothar Empire was the School of Heritage, but this school decided that the sacred land was the landing site of Saint Ain, which was located on the territory of a vassal state subordinate to the Empire. The Empire could not agree with the aggressive desire of the School of Heritage to return the sacred land to them, so the Empire created the Western School. Carmine thought in bewilderment. That is, the Empire itself created a religion that would not contradict their basic policy? Frederick noted that the history of the formation of the Western School was very different from the history of other schools. Some even consider the Western School to be a delusion. He was surprised and thought, is he sure that he can tell him about such things? Frederick said, however, in his opinion, the Western School is conducive to the development of their country because it respects the customs of their region. Now, the holy teaching is the hope of the people, and the basic principles of the schools support this hope in people. Harmony is the foundation of the Western School, and he sincerely hopes that he will not use it as a weapon to subjugate other nations. Silence fell in the classroom, and the protagonist thought that this was right. It was obvious that the Baron had just told him part of the taboo. He looked at Frederick and Ilya and awkwardly said that it was very interesting and exciting. He hoped that he would tell him many more new things. Frederick smiled, and Carmine thought again that these observers would try to capture the Baron, but they were just standing there. Would they ignore it? At that moment, he felt relieved and looked forward to the next lesson with the Baron. A few days later, Timon disappeared, and Baron Frederick became a victim of bullying. According to the spy, he was still his hands and feet. Knowing the dark side of the Empire, he did any dirty work for him. He decided to live in a world different from secular society, so he hopes to die a peaceful death in his bed. He could be stabbed, strangled, left, and he is ready to risk his own life to fulfill the mission, but he was not ready to burn alive. Carmine ordered him to answer quickly, to which the spy was frightened and silent, and thought, where did such pressure come from? He said that he would take him. The monk asked, will he continue to remain silent? He was always stubborn, even if they cannot execute him as a traitor, but they know exactly what he taught His Majesty. The authority of Western teaching is at stake, and he ordered his subordinate to do whatever he wants, but he must beat a confession out of him. The man looked at him sadly, and Frederick uttered the name of His Majesty. According to the protagonist, several days have passed since the disappearance of the Baron and his son. He thought, according to the report of Count Wadet, Timon was placed under house arrest, and the Baron was arrested by the Inquisition. He was too relaxed and too carried away by the emergence of new and high-quality information. He could survive as long as he played the role of the fool emperor, but he could not let them do whatever they wanted with his benefactor. He looked at the exit and then went out to the maid. She asked in surprise, what was wrong? When suddenly the protagonist pushed her away and falling, she fell asleep. Carmine looked at the ceiling and said, today he is also here. He gestured to him with his hand to come down, but the spy did not dare. After the protagonist used magic, he displeasedly ordered him to come down here. The spy descended from the ceiling, and he displeasedly noted, too slowly, and then asked to take him to the count. The spy asked him to think again, and Carmine leaned over in front of him said, He seemed not to quite understand. Either he does what he is told, or he will die right here. He looked at him with fear and said that he would take him. After a while, Carmine thought about the fact that he had developed this spell just in case. A barrier spell, a magical barrier with a reflective surface. If he covered himself with it, even mana-sensitive mages would not be able to detect him. And a barrier spell, a shoe version, to prevent dirt from getting on his feet, so he would hide all traces of having gone outside. The protagonist went outside and thanked the spy for waiting for him, and then they ran forward. The protagonist thought, no good, because the child's body is clearly not ready for this. He is already tired, although rather he is running too fast. He's not leading him in circles, is he? Carmine stopped and put his hands on the ground and said, he is not just some fool emperor. Suddenly, a servant golem appeared from the ground. The spy looked at it in surprise and said that they were close. The protagonist looked at the building and thought, is this it? The spy said that there shouldn't be any more problems since there was no one else nearby. Meanwhile, Alfred was looking at the paper when he suddenly heard a sound from outside. He went to the window and opened it, looking at the protagonist, descending from the servant golem. Alfred was confused. Was he really that strong? The protagonist entered his office and said that he thought so. He already assumed it. He replied that he was aware of his uniqueness, since he was able to use magic in the palace. Carmine thought, so using magic indoors really is unusual. Alfred noted that if he had been born into a different family, he could have become an influential magician. He thought discontentedly, a mage of what? Does he mean that now his only path is to be an emperor? He asked, does he understand why he is here? Alfred looked down sadly and asked him to sit down. As he said earlier, his escort Timon is under house arrest. He is under strict surveillance, and Baron Frederick has been accused of lying, so he is in custody. The Inquisition is investigating. He believes that they want to beat a confession out of him and then execute him. Carmine asked, did they still not like the classes? Alfred noted, to be more precise, they did not like Frederick's phrase. The protagonist thought that the problem was that he revealed the background of the origins of religions, and how to understand this. Alfred said that at the moment this country, especially the Duchy of Raoul, is hunting down various ethnic groups practicing another religion and forcibly converting them to Western schools. This policy is promoted by the great patron Saint George. In other words, this is revenge for criticizing the actions of Western teaching in front of the emperor. Carmine asked, but why then was he not arrested on the spot? Alfred said that most likely it is due to the fact that the Baron belonged to the Regent faction and not the Chancellor. He thought, does this mean that the Regent faction simply abandoned the Baron? They are constantly at war with the Chancellor, because every man counts. What did the Master of Ceremonies get in exchange for the Baron? Alfred asked him to think again, and the protagonist replied that he had already thought everything through. He noticed that he was losing his cool. Carmine thought that he was right. It was hard for him to think calmly. Perhaps these were the limitations of his childish body. He called out to Alfred and asked that he stood at the very top of this country, but he was unable to save even his own teacher. So, who would recognize him as emperor? Therefore, he would not change his mind. Alfred said upset that this incident was not entirely related to the Chancellor. It was a personal request from Georg himself. He had his own faction. Carmine wondered if there were differences of opinion within the Chancellor faction. He replied that the same could be said about the Regent faction. He and the Master of Ceremonies had differences of opinion at the very least. The Master of Ceremonies did not want to see women in politics. The protagonist was surprised and said that for some reason he had assumed something like that. Then it was entirely possible that Georg had convinced the Regent to bring Timon to him. So it wasn't the Regent who turned the Baron in, but the Master of Ceremonies? Alfred pointed out that the Regent probably didn't even know they were captured. He asked, was there anything else? Alfred said that as far as he knew, the Chancellor had been informed of the deal. He thought he wanted to make sure Georg didn't use his power against him, even though they were brothers, but they were wary of each other. Carmine thought about it, and the factional fighting was getting worse, so it was clear that both factions had conflicts of interest. The Regent hadn't been informed of the incident, meaning Georg had acted on his own. Alfred said he couldn't act. The protagonist said he knew, and he should be ignorant of these events for now. He wouldn't do anything until they told him about the arrest. He replied that it was natural, but he would advise him not to do anything even after they told him. He shouldn't take even the slightest risk. Carmine thought, until he regained power, it would be better to continue playing the role of the fool emperor, but they would beat a confession out of him and execute him. He could not ignore such permissiveness. Carmine called out to him and said that sometimes the most reasonable solution is not the best. He asked him not to worry, since the result would justify the risk. How would he rule an entire country if he could not even save his teacher? The problem was how long the Baron could resist the Inquisition. He could rely on him. A week had passed since the disappearance of the father and son. There was still no news of Frederick's death. This meant he was still alive. Carlos called out to the protagonist and said that it was time for him to go. According to Carmine, in his past life, he had a niece, and every day the memories of her were becoming more and more faded. He barely remembered her face and name, but he clearly remembered how she showed that she did not like something. Logic applies to children. They don't even know what adults are talking about. The protagonist scratched his head and mentally said, Who would have known that he would follow his niece's example? Childish whims that cannot be stopped by a reasonable approach. But what will the nobles do if their emperor behaves like this? Now they will see it. They entered the office and Carlos introduced himself, saying that he was glad that he was finally able to meet them. From today, he will be teaching his language classes. Carmine was surprised and thought, so he is his new teacher? It seems that he will have to use him. He asked discontentedly who he is and what happened to Frederick, and ordered to bring him here. Carlos, perplexed, said that from today he will be teaching him. But the protagonist noted that he does not need him. If he understood everything, then he should bring Frederick. The protagonist thought that aristocrats are driven by pride, and it is easy to find the right words, especially when a little boy like him is talking to them. He should already say the words he needs to say. Carlos smugly said that he was sorry, but the Baron was in custody and could not bring such a traitor to his majesty. Carmine thought that now he officially knew that Frederick was in prison and thanked the stupid aristocrat. He was surprised and asked, in custody. He did not know, and who did this without his knowledge? The protagonist asked to just let him go, and that's it. Carlos said that this was impossible, and the protagonist asked, impossible, right? According to him, if a child was raised correctly, then he will understand when he is refused, but he is not one of those children. Carmine exclaimed in displeasure that he is the emperor, and he is not going to follow the orders of his emperor, so he does not listen to him. The protagonist called the guards and pointing his finger at Carlos, ordered them to kill him since he insulted the emperor. The guards were confused and wanted to say something, but his words were illogical, and he again ordered them to kill him quickly. After the guards did not listen to him, he said that he understood everything. They also do not listen to their emperor. No one teaches him logic. Now for everyone, he is a psycho emperor who wanted to kill a man just like that, and deciding that they themselves cannot cope here. One of the guards called those who can stop the emperor. He called the chancellor and the master of ceremonies, and then told them the same reason. The man he liked was put in prison, and he had not even heard about it, and this one also managed to insult the emperor. Intertwining childish egoism with facts and adding rebellious behavior to this, he put forward his statement. If someone does not listen to him, he is a traitor, and traitors want to kill the emperor, so he must kill them first. They were the first to take power from the emperor to do whatever they wanted with this country. Carmine exclaimed with displeasure, and the man who locked Frederick up also needed to be killed. The protagonist thought that he needed to be naive, stupid, and good-natured. That's the kind of emperor they were raising. But what happens if the puppet emperor stops listening to them? Although these are just childish whims, and in fact no one has died yet, the Chancellor and the Master of Ceremonies said that they will figure it out, including Count Carlos, and then they left. Carmine scratched his head in bewilderment and thought, what is he investigating? They already know this. Everything is going as he planned, and there will be more problems. It turns out that not all factions agree with George's actions. He ran out of the office and ran to his mother. He remembered asking her what she was doing. Alexia, surprised, asked him not to trust Duke Raoul, since he was clearly up to something bad, and he thought that apparently she does not like the Chancellor, and the Master of Ceremonies tries to keep her away from politics. The Chancellor does not like when people meddle in his affairs, and the Master of Ceremonies, who does not want to involve his daughter in their affairs and their interests, coincided. These two will unite, which means he must bring the Regent into the game. This is his chance to bring conflict into the two factions that declared a temporary truce and divide them into 4 smaller ones. Meanwhile, Carmine ran to Alexia in tears, and she asked in surprise, what was wrong? He asked her for help, and she stopped the out-of-breath maid. The main character looked at her with a pitiful look and said that the Chancellor imprisoned Frederick and Timon, whom she brought for him, without permission. But in fact, Timon should not have been touched at all. The Chancellor's servants received the go-ahead from the Master of Ceremonies and decided to act on their own. He is a child. Why can't he make a mistake and say something wrong? Alexia asked in surprise, what does this mean? He answered that they do not listen to him and ignore him. They probably want to start a riot, so he will kill them all. According to the protagonist, there is a Master of Ceremonies among them. He only said once that he wants Frederick back. And then there were words about murder, but they themselves are to blame for not listening to him. Alexia calmed him down and said that she will get them out. Carmine happily asked, is it true? Is she not lying? She answered, of course not. She will definitely fulfill his request. The main character burst into tears and thanked her. He can only rely on his mother. And then he thought that the Regent will soon find out that Philippe also approved of Frederick's imprisonment. But if she goes back on her words, she risks causing her displeasure. And if she does everything right, she will earn his trust and can even return to politics. Philip's daughter's achievements may help him too, so they can put pressure on the Chancellor's faction with their joint efforts. If this happens, the Chancellor will definitely try to leave with minimal losses, and something like his brother gave the order without his permission will sound. Georg is the leader of the Western School. No matter how much the Regent is indignant, but they will not be able to remove him from his post, but they can ruin his reputation. With his trust, the Regent will be able to actively interfere in politics, and the faction will have 2 leaders. And Georg will not remain silent either after all the blame was thrown on him. so there will be disagreement within the chancellor's faction. Carmine walked along the corridor and happily thought that they will gradually destroy each other. This way, they will weaken both factions and Alfred will not complain. He just wants to save Frederick and has done everything he could, so all that remains is to wait. He thinks that a life without regrets really does not exist. Everyone has regrets, both big and small. Perhaps this is the very essence of human life, and it applies to him too. Therefore, in this life, he tried to live without regrets, and when he was reborn in this world, he learned that he is the emperor. The adults around him want to use him, and only one person has shown him sincere kindness. Will he be able to live without regrets if he does not repay him? The day after the emperor's rampage, Carmine happily asked if Frederick had been released yet. Alfred agreed. He and his son were released and are now healing their wounds in the guest house. It seems that his recent hysteria made even the people of Jorg nervous. Even though he was a child, he was still an emperor, and if they continued to resist his will, they would be accused of obstructing the law, so they decided not to risk it. The protagonist did not listen to him, and, having said that everything suited him, quickly ran away. He must visit Frederick as soon as possible. Alfred saw him off with a sad look and wanted to say that this was a necessary part of his growing up. Meanwhile, the protagonist ran down the corridor and exclaimed, "It worked." He saved Baron Frederick. He thought that now he would not let them do whatever they wanted. Suddenly, he noticed Timon standing near the door and asked what was wrong. He smiled and then sadly looked at the floor. Carmine clenched his teeth in fear, when suddenly the door to the office opened and he saw an exhausted Frederick. The protagonist clenched his fist in anger and thought that everything would be fine, and he thought that he managed to save his benefactor. But he was too late. Frederick called out to him, and the protagonist happily asked, could he hear him? No need to force yourself to speak. The doctor bowed and said that if he was needed, he could just call him. The protagonist sat down next to the bed and asked Baron, how is he? Frederick looked at him and said that he wanted to thank him because he saved him. The protagonist sadly said that he did not have time. Frederick stood up and said with a smile, after all, nothing can be hidden from him. He has magic, right? Carmine hesitantly agreed. He learned it himself and can do some things. Frederick asked, did he know that, but do the people around him know about it? Carmine noted that only Alfred and a couple of his subordinates. He said, so he was not mistaken, and then opened his shirt. The protagonist looked at how scars formed on his body, and he said that it was partial magic rejection syndrome, a disease in which the mana inside the body suddenly begins to rage and tissues begin to gradually deteriorate. Over time, the disease spreads throughout the body and eventually leads to death. Modern medicine has not yet come up with a cure for this disease. Frederick asked him not to worry, as the disease is not dangerous for those who can consciously manipulate mana. In other words, there is no threat to him. It is a rare disease that only affects those who do not possess magic. Carmine looked at the floor and he called out to him in surprise. The protagonist apologized to him and thought about how he knew that he had very little time left. He chose to take a risk and speak out against the church than to die from the disease. He acted frivolously. The protagonist, with tears in his eyes, said that he did not know how to calm the mana raging in another body. He thought that he could help his benefactor, but he can't even cope with one disease. He can't do anything right and began to apologize. Frederick wiped his tears with his finger and said that he was too kind after all. Does he know how many people live in their country? Carmine replied that he did not know, and Frederick said about 30 million. Did he understand that? He should not risk himself to save one person because he had to protect them. He would kill tens of thousands of people and lead 30 million inhabitants of the empire, and such an ordinary question did not deserve his attention. Carmine sadly agreed with him. He was right. As an emperor, he was truly weak and pathetic. He thought about how he was born an emperor. He thought that there was something special about him, but he was an ordinary person. Frederick said, however, he saw a ray of hope in him. Carmine looked at him in surprise and asked, he did not understand. What hope? He did not even know what the right thing to do was. Frederick asked him to leave everything as it was and live the way he wanted. His suffering would only make him wander in circles, but he was sure that he could find the right path. The protagonist was surprised and asked, the right one? After all, he could not save him. Frederick said that he saved him and did not even imagine how he helped him. The protagonist wiped his tears and said that he would prefer more specific advice. The latter asked him to move forward and leave a path for others to follow, as that was the role of the emperor. Carmine began to cry again and wiped his tears with his sleeve and said, as expected of his teacher, that was a great lesson. It was time for him to go and asked him to get some rest. Frederick thanked him for his concern and Carmine left the office. He called out to Timon and said that there was nothing more he could do. He was truly sorry for what had happened to him. Timon grabbed him sharply by the shoulders and told him not to apologize, as Frederick had not criticized the church for the sake of him apologizing later. Father had done nothing wrong, and he had tried to help. That was enough for him. Carmine asked him not to bow his head, as they had both truly taught him a lot. He placed his hand on his face and asked him to pull himself together and said that he was dismissing Timon from his position from now on. He asked him to stay by the Baron's side, and that was the emperor's order. Timon knelt down and said that he would do so with pleasure. After a while, Frederick asked if he had heard everything. Timon agreed with him and he said that His Majesty was not a stupid child emperor and that he had potential that could outshine even the first emperor. Frederick asked him to help him. That was his task from now on. Timon tearfully remarked that he would listen to him and would definitely become His Majesty's shield and sword. Frederick placed his hand on his head and told him to pull himself together. Timon smiled and remarked that he sounded just like the emperor. The Baron was taken care of by his son for the next 3 days, and Frederick breathed his last in peace and quiet. Frederick's funeral was quiet, with only his closest friends and relatives in attendance. When Timon asked him to attend, he refused. Too much support could attract unnecessary attention. He thinks he did the right thing when he decided not to go, unlike the priests and their prayers for the deceased. He was overcome by the desire to kill. 2 weeks have passed since then. Timon asked permission to leave, and the protagonist said that he did a good job. Carmine looked after him and thought that lately Timon was acting too politely around him. Apparently, he is not going to leave his post as his assistant, and in the evenings, Alfred teaches him martial arts. In front of him is a completely different person, and this is frightening, although maybe this is normal, since the Count took up his training. Now the palace is noisy because of his hysteria, which happened after a person dear to him was sent to prison without his knowledge. Although Frederick was released, he died of an illness, and apparently they decided that his hysteria stopped. In fact, even George escaped punishment because of his silence. Now he will come to terms with this, but only for now. Although George is not punished, his authority is undermined, since he is cut off from affairs and he will begin to feel dissatisfaction with his brother. At this rate, there is a high chance of a faction split. Naturally, the Chancellor will try to prevent this, and everyday nobles, Gorg's close associates, come to him for an audience, and all are eager to receive his approval. It seems that Philip has handed over his powers to the Regent, and he himself returned to the Duchy of Akikar. To leave at such a time, did something happen there? The public does not see all the disorder caused by the return of the Regent to political affairs. Judging by the information received, the internal conflict between the factions is flaring up more and more. He also needs to show himself, deceive both factions. Carmine looked into the office and said that he was going to his place, so if there was anything needed, they could send a message. Helk bowed and said that it would be done. The protagonist was about to open the door of the room, when suddenly he turned around. The man called out to Helk and whispered that they couldn't let Hackley's madness happen again. He replied that it was a reasonable idea. Meanwhile, Alfred and Timon were fighting on the training ground. He was swinging his sword and Timon was dodging, when suddenly he kicked him, and he flew to the side, thus continuing the fight. Alfred and Timon crossed their swords, when suddenly he hit him again, and Timon fell to the floor. Alfred held the tip of his sword to him and said that it had been 10 days since they started training, and there had been almost no progress. He thought that he should give up, and Timon looked at him in surprise. Timon gritted his teeth in anger and said that he had promised his father that he would become His Majesty's sword and shield, and he could not break his promise. Alfred remarked that he should always keep an eye on the enemy's movements. His Majesty could be attacked by more than one person, after which they continued training. The spy asked if this was the guy from the Akikar region. His colleague agreed, the main attendant of His Majesty. He remarked that as His Majesty's favorite, he should sit quietly and not stand out. He said that he had heard that attendants also acted as bodyguards. The girl approached them and said that his father had recently passed away. The spy agreed. The title of Baron passed to his distant relative because the guy was still too young. He could have taken advantage of the noisy environment and returned to his native lands. Why was he clinging to the title of escort? She asked. Who knows? But the boy's attitude towards His Majesty had changed. He began to respect him, and this was in the report of other spies. Spy grinned and asked, did he seriously fall in love with His Majesty? She replied that everything was possible, and she no longer understood why the head personally took up his training. Spy said that it was his personal business. Maybe he believed that an extra living mill never hurt. He was holding up well for someone who had lost his father and title. After a while, Carmine was called by Alfred and asked, was there something urgent? He thought about the fact that he hadn't even heard him. Was he really an aristocrat? He said that there was nothing urgent, and the protagonist thought with displeasure, why did he come then? He had a question. What was Hackley's madness? Alfred said that he most likely heard it from the Chancellor's people and would tell him. Hacklea was the empress of the third ruler of the post-Guild dynasty. By that time, the empire was already in decline, and the early death of the third emperor only accelerated this process. Carmine thought that Hackley was a place, and this was a person. Alfred said that in order to ascend to the throne, the third emperor killed all his brothers and only his sister survived. The protagonist noted that he did not rule for long because he died young. He agreed. The official cause of death was illness. The protagonist asked, does this mean that his sister became a key link after the death of the emperor? Alfred said that everything is correct. Even before the struggle for the throne began, the third emperor handed over his sister to the Bungarth tribe. Her eldest son was the Cardinal Duke of Bungarth. The protagonist thought that this meant that everything was like this. That's why Emperor Cardinal expanded his territories so quickly. and that's why the nobles obediently followed him. He came to his senses and asked, Cardinal was found and he ascended the throne. It seems like this is where the whole story ends, right? Alfred noted that he didn't quite remember how the Bungarth tribe got their title. Carmine agreed, and he said that from the point of view of the center of the empire, the tribes living on the border were not much different from barbarians. Empress Hackley naturally held the same opinion. She was against the throne going to the owner of Bungarth blood, so she adopted her younger brother's son and made him the 4th emperor. But the child was still too young to rule on his own, and she obviously tried to seize power, acting as regent. As a result of her reign, the Serdnoir dynasty was formed and many nobles went over to the side of Duke Bungarth. Hackley, who hated barbarians, refused to provide any support to Emperor Cardinal. The protagonist added, and soon the post-Gilov dynasty collapsed. So, Hackley's madness means a complete transfer of power into the hands of the regent? Alfred said that's exactly it. He said thoughtfully, although his mother would not do the same. But why did he come? Alfred came to his senses and said that the northern region of Tanabe was trying to achieve independence. Carmine smiled and thought, he came to tell about the situation in which he could not intervene in any way, and asked him to tell in more detail. Alfred said that the northern border of the Tanabe region borders Tomi Sassanaki, the kingdom of Eri, the Grand Duchy of Gyuhi, and the Republic of Gafor. The region has a unique culture, and the locals speak the Tanabe language. The nobles of this region do not belong to either the Chancellor faction or the Regent faction. They advocate neutrality. Having gained independence, they called themselves the Tanabe Union. The protagonist was surprised and asked, did he say that they advocate neutrality? Alfred agreed. The nobles who could become his allies have already left this country. Carmine said displeasedly, if they still maintain neutrality, then they would not have helped him much anyway. So that's why Philip left the capital? He said that it was true. Philip had a wider network of informants than the Chancellor, or it was all about the distance. He asked him to look at it and put the map on the table. Alfred said that they were currently here. The capital of the empire is Cardinal. The nobles from the Chancellor faction are located in the Duchy of Raoul, which is to the east of the capital. In the west, mostly nobles from the Regent faction live, and the Duchy of Akikar is also located there. Carmine noted that the Tanabe alliance is located in the northwest. He agreed it is closer to the Duchy of Akikar, which means that all the events unfolded almost 2 steps away from the area controlled by Philip. The protagonist said that the information reached him almost instantly. Alfred noted that it seemed that the regent was completely unaware of this matter. Carmine replied contentedly that the father and daughter do not communicate with each other at all. Alfred said that sooner or later Duke Raoul will also go to his lands. The protagonist wondered why he needed this. The Tanabe alliance would most likely invade the empire once they settled their lands. Alfred pointed his index finger at the map and asked him to look at this. As he could see, the regent land bordered the sea, and the Tanabe would definitely want these lands, since transportation by sea was much more efficient than by land. Carmine pointed out that this meant that the Chancellor's lands would be left alone for a while. But after all, these were his political opponent's lands, so why would the Chancellor care about all this? He replied that it was exactly so, since there had already been precedents for the Chancellor handing over part of the imperial territories to an enemy country. And of course, this was taking into account that the lands belonged to his political opponents. However, this time, the main difference is in the enemy country. Firstly, the Tanabe region gained independence thanks to a certain trading company, and now they are investigating this matter, and as soon as they have details, he will inform him. The protagonist asked, the company belongs to 2 countries, and they provided support. One of these countries is the religious country of Toi Sassanaki? Alfred asked. Did he guess? Carmine agreed. They entered into a war with the kingdom of Belub in order to reclaim their sacred lands. But then he got engaged to Rosalia. As a result, Belub and Bungarth surrounded them from both sides. Toi Sassanaki was forced to retreat because they could not fight on 2 fronts. But after Tanabe gained independence, their borders became distant. Supporting the Tanabe alliance to make it a buffer country is a cheap and effective solution. Alfred noted that he made a good conclusion, but the Chancellor's concerns are not related to them. He pointed to the Republic of Gafor and asked permission to tell him a little about the Republic. In fact, they only have a name from the Republic, and the common people do not control politics. It is a republic of aristocrats for aristocrats. In other words, it is an aristocratic republic where the nobles overthrew the king and appointed their own government. The will of the common people was not taken into account when creating a new country. The Gafor tribe settled on the lands they took from the Bungarth tribe, and the tribe became nomads and migrated close to the borders of the Lothar Empire. And the Gafor tribe grew into an empire, and they decided to move further south, but the Bungarth tribes stopped them, and the Gafor Empire suffered a crushing defeat. It was this victory that made Cardinal the successor of the Lothar Empire and the founder of the Bungarth Empire famous. During the reign of Edward, the 6th Emperor, a law on the monarchy was passed against the Gafor. Under the pretext of restoring the monarchy, Bungarth invaded the Republic twice, and they were defeated. Carmine, perplexed, said that Bungarth and Gafor had been at odds with each other for a long time. And perplexed, he thought that he had said something wrong, but he was not obliged to repeat after him. Alfred awkwardly said that they had been a little distracted, and that most of the chancellor's lands bordered the Republic of Gafur. By supporting the independence of the Tanabe Union, the Republic is moving their troops in another direction, and from the chancellor's point of view, it all looks like preparation for a full-scale invasion, and so he gets ready. The protagonist noticed that everything became much clearer thanks to him and thanked him. He asked him to continue studying the affairs of that company, and that was the end of their evening classes. The chancellor learned about the situation 3 months after Tanabe gained independence. Karl slammed his fist on the table in displeasure and asked what kind of Tanabe union this was. The subordinate asked what he would do. He replied that everything was decided and he needed to return to his lands as soon as possible. The subordinate asked in bewilderment, but was he sure that the Gafur Republic was planning an attack? They would assume that they would go to war against them, but they had guns, and would quickly recapture the captured territories from them. Karl angrily asked if he had ever encountered the army of the Gafur Republic in person. Another subordinate said that many of their soldiers were skilled in horsemanship, and that the heavy cavalry of Gafur was excellent in battle. Karl noted that the ancestors of Gafur were nomads. Horseback riding was the basis of their culture. He happily agreed. Even so, they were not afraid of them. Karl said, on the contrary, the power of their heavy cavalry was the best on the entire continent. Cannons are powerful weapons, but in speed, accuracy, and quantity, they are inferior to cavalry. And they are talking about Gafur's cavalry, the strongest on the continent. They will simply trample their soldiers. The subordinate asked fearfully, exactly what should they do? Karl was silent, and then said, their borders. They will build fortresses along the border with Gafur and see what they will do then. As many fortresses as possible are needed, and ordered them not to stand still and quickly prepare to leave. That is how the chancellor left the capital after Philip. The heads of the two main factions left the castle because everyone was in confusion, and as a result, the emperor's strength had weakened slightly. Because of all the chaos, Timon had to be constantly on guard. Lately, he had started taking fencing and self-defense lessons at night. Meanwhile, Alfred and Carmine were training, and their swords collided with each other with a ringing sound. Suddenly, the protagonist missed an attack, and Alfred asked what they should do. His technique lacked precision. He said that he thought it would be calmer here without Karl and Philip, but Georg and the old woman were still here. He put away his sword and noted that now that no one was commanding them, they could get out of control, and he did not want that. This was just his thinking out loud, and he apologized. Besides, he increasingly wanted to study during the day. Alfred sighed heavily and said that lately, in the castle, more and more often they called him the Sleepy Emperor. The protagonist handed the sword to Timon and replied that it was a good thing, although it annoyed him when the lower aristocrats called him a man-lover and commented on everything he did. He was 7 years old, so where was his brain? Timon wondered. But wasn't that a great cover? Besides, he was much younger than him when he received his first proposal from a man. Carmine sadly asked what was wrong with this country. It seemed like his suffering was not going to end. It had been 4 months since the Tanabe Union gained independence, and according to reports, the borders were still calm. And today, a rare guest was coming to visit him. Carmine looked at Rosalia with embarrassment and said that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. She happily agreed with him. Jordi said that a lot of time had passed since their last meeting. The protagonist thought that they were engaged when they were still children, although it was strange to say such a thing when he was only 7 years old. Rosalia sat down on the sofa and noted that as an allied country, they would like to know His Majesty's opinion regarding the independence of the Tanabe Union. Carmine said that the territories of the Tanabe Union are a buffer zone, and in connection with the recent events, there is a possibility that Tomiyasunaki will attack. Karl thinks so. He apologized, since he himself does not know everything. Rosalia said that he should not apologize, since thanks to his help, the borders of the Belib Kingdom are now much calmer than before, and they can start building forts on the front line. Jordis noted that there are also more food supplies, and they do not have to worry about the population going hungry. The protagonist happily said that he was glad to hear this, and thought that the war should have started immediately after the territories gained independence. Is the Tanabe and Tomiyasunaki union more peaceful than they thought? Rosalia said that she still had one question for him. He asked what it was. She called out to Jordis, who told her that Duke Akikar and Duke Rule had sent them a considerable amount of supplies. Thanks to his help, they were able to stabilize the situation on the front lines, and there was now a truce between them and Tomiyasunaki, so they had more time for domestic politics. Rosalia asked if she was wondering if the Bungarth Empire was planning to go to war with the Tanabe alliance, and if so, should they return the excess supplies. Carmine thought that he expected nothing less from the princess, since she already knew that Karl and Philip were not in the capital. He asked what she would like specifically. She replied that the supplies might still be useful to them. The protagonist sipped the drink from his cup and said that in that case, they might not have to return them. Jordice and Rosalia smiled sweetly at each other, and the protagonists thought that it was their own fault that they left the capital. You can already hear the rumors that the emperor is trying to impress his bride, spreading around the palace, and he'll piss off 2 old men too. Rosalia happily thanks him, and he thinks awkwardly, not even trying to hide his motives. Rosalia has already discussed everything that is needed with him, but they can't go back to their homeland so soon. They all pretended to wait for Karl and Philip to arrive, but since they didn't show up, Rosalia has no choice but to act according to the emperor's will. A few days later, he decides to give Rosalia a tour of the palace to put one of his plans into action. It's called attracting the attention of the girl he likes with a tour of the palace. Rosalia looked around the castle and happily said that he knows so much. Carmine smiled and thought, it seems like his reputation outside the country is at rock bottom, but Rosalia seems to be showing him signs of sympathy, or is it just his imagination? The main thing is that the idiots from both factions are watching them, and he wants to let them know that he likes Rosalia, and his real goal is in the library. They entered the great library of the Bungarth Empire, and Rosalia said in surprise, they say that this is the largest library on the entire continent. She has long wanted to read a book, but she could not find it. Could she look for it here? Carmine agreed and thought sadly, what? Rosalia went to the shelf with books and exclaimed happily, she found it. This is what she wanted to read. And what would His Majesty like to read? Carmine awkwardly took a book from the shelf and said, this one sounds interesting. Rosalia was surprised and asked, a book on magic? Does he read such complex books? The protagonist agreed. He understands books of this genre very quickly. Rosalia happily ran up to him and said, this is amazing. She is glad that he turned out to be such a smart person. She is sure that everything is possible for them. Carmine thought in horror. She understood everything. He is forbidden to use magic in front of people. Or rather, no one taught him how to do it, so he should not be able to do magic. In order to maintain the image of a stupid emperor, people must believe that he does not know how to use magic. So he mastered magic in secret from everyone. But this approach has a limit, and if he wants to learn more, he needs books. People will become suspicious if he goes to the library to get books on magic. So he thought that Rosalia could be used as an excuse. The emperor decided to show off in front of his bride and took a more difficult book. Rosalia asked, is something wrong? Carmine awkwardly said that perhaps he will take a couple of books and she can also take whatever she likes. She smiled and asked, can she really do that? The protagonist thought that this girl definitely understood his intentions and decided to play along. This is bad, since she knows that he is only pretending to be a stupid emperor. What are the intentions of the Belub kingdom? They can cooperate with one of the factions, and it would be better to keep a distance from Rosalia. The plan to attract the attention of the girl he likes with a tour of the palace changed to taking a difficult book to show off his coolness in front of the girl, but he couldn't read it. The plan to take books on magic from the library was successful, but now he is afraid. A month later, Rosalia and her companions set out for the kingdom of Belub. Rosalia looked at Carmine, and he thought that she looked a little sad, but he didn't know what Belub was trying to achieve yet. He called out to Alfred, and he asked if he thought everything had gone well. The protagonist closed the book and agreed. It was very informative and just what he needed. He especially liked the book on enchantment, and now he will have more opportunities to do something. Enchantment is assigning additional functions to an object using Magic A. His fastest spell is a beam of compressed thermal energy. The main problem with the spell is its low power. In order to achieve at least some effect, he needs to fire at one point for a long time. Carmine said that he can easily burn through a sheet, but if the enemy is a person, and if he attacks seriously, then this spell will be of no use. Alfred noted that he is right, and one should not forget about the degree of nakedness of the enemy. If a knight in armor attacks him, he will not have a chance. The protagonist agreed, but with the help of enchantment, he can add the attribute of fire to his spell. 2 different magics appeared on his fingers, which he formed into a large energy. Alfred said in surprise that this was amazing. With this armor would no longer be a problem for him. He said that the characteristics of the main spell, speed, were preserved. The flaw in the spell was corrected. The knowledge of their ancestors was truly an amazing thing. In enchantment, there is such a term as elements. This is a classification of various phenomena into attributes. For him, as a person from the modern era, this is all old thinking. But in magic, it is important to form a clear image in your head of what you want to get. You will have to get used to thinking differently. He asked, so why did he come? Alfred answered to report on the case of Princess Rosalia. As he asked, he conducted an investigation, and she is not connected with any of the factions. Carmine was surprised and said that this was good news, and then thought, did he just imagine it? So the kingdom of Belub listens to the words of the emperor? Be that as it may, it was thanks to Rosalia that he was able to take these books. The protagonist remembered her silhouette and thought that next time he should be gentler with her. He asked, something else? Alfred snapped his fingers, and suddenly a rope fell from the ceiling, followed by Fabio. Carmine pointed at him in confusion and asked if he could explain himself. According to Carmine, shortly before he was born, his father from this world, Crown Prince Jean, died in battle. Emperor Edward died of grief upon receiving this news. The empire had lost its emperor. Who would be the next ruler? Naturally, the empty throne alarmed the entire court, and amidst this chaos, rumors spread about 3 candidates for the throne. Eleanor, the wife of Marquis Akikar, Margarita, the wife of Marquis Lamted, and Liz, the wife of the former Count of Beria. All 3 candidates were women, but they were all Edward's sisters and had the right to claim the throne. But in the end, the firstborn of the deceased Prince Jean had more rights to the throne. The protagonist asked, and after that, was there no one left who could harm me? Alfred agreed, and this version of events was presented to the public. This unrest was called the Rebellion of the 3 Families. Carmine asked him to continue his story. Alfred said that they would return to the period before his birth. It was unknown whether the child that Lady Alexia was carrying was really Prince Jean's son. Carmine thought that she had a lover and noted to himself that she was nothing but trouble. Alfred said that the struggle for the throne escalated into a battle between the Karl faction and the Philip faction. The chancellor was sided with the Marquis of Akikar. Eleanor, the wife of the Marquis of Lamted. Margarita, the wife of the Marquis of Lamted, sided with Philip. The Marquis of Akikar's territories were adjacent to Philip's territories, and their houses were in conflict. Carmine asked what the reason was. Alfred replied that the Dudic house had lived in the Akikar lands for several generations and refused to obey the Duke. The protagonist noted that this was similar to a case where an ancient city refused to join a new prefecture. Alfred said that the Chancellor tried to use this conflict to his advantage and supported Eleanor, the wife of Marquis Dudish, in the fight for the throne. The lands of the Marquis of Lamted bordered the Chancellor's territories, and border disputes occurred between them constantly. Currently, in their country, if there are no specific landmarks, such as mountains or rivers, villages are used to determine the boundaries of territories. For example, one village is in the Marquis's territory, and the neighboring village is already in the Chancellor's territory. However, new villages are constantly being built, and old ones are abandoned. Because of this, there are constant disputes over the boundaries of territories. The protagonist thought that now there are no tools with which to make accurate markings of territories. He will have to do this when he takes power under control. Alfred continued. He was born in the midst of a political war between factions. It was soon confirmed that he was the son of Prince John. Carmine asked in surprise, how did they manage to confirm this? He answered that since the time of the Lothar Empire, special equipment for determining lineage had been invented. The protagonist thought it was some kind of DNA test. It was amazing that Karl and Philippe believed until the very end that he was not the prince's son and that his mother was not trustworthy. The legitimate successor was born. Karl and Philippe decided to temporarily unite. Marquis Akikar and Marquis Lamted received support only because they were enemies of enemies. He said that Eleanor and Margarita had husbands, and he was completely without support. Alfred noted that putting an innocent baby on the throne or one of the families that could become your enemy in the future was an obvious choice for Karl and Philippe. The support of both families was cut off. Carmine asked if they would not unite just for this. What really happened there? Alfred said mysteriously that Karl and Philip exchanged maps. The protagonist was surprised and asked him only not to tell, and Alfred said that they had entered into a secret agreement according to which the lands of Marquis Akikar would go to Philippe and the lands of Marquis Lamted Beria would go to Karl. The protagonist said that even Count Beria was dragged into this. They invaded foreign lands and crushed the 3 families by force only because of their own greed. He agreed, and he asked how many people died during the rebellion of the 3 families. Alfred answered that as far as he knew, all 3 families were slaughtered completely. Taking into account the guards, the approximate number was about 400 people. Carmine thought, what kind of rebellion of the 3 families? Because there was no rebellion. These 2 made a rebellion out of nothing, killed a lot of people for their own glory and benefit. They are rotten to the core. Alfred said that this happened 7 years ago. This is the truth of the rebellion of the 3 families, which occurred immediately after his birth. The protagonist thanked him. Now he knows everything he needs to know about those events, and he has a rough idea of who they are. But could he still introduce them? Alfred said that he was supposedly killed during the rebellion of the 3 families, a rebel, the only survivor of the house of Marquis Lamted. It seems he is from a side branch of the family and has managed to hide so far, but he caught him when he tried to cross the borders of the country. Carmine thought, does this mean he is on the Empire's wanted list? Why does he need him? He said he thought he would want to get more details about this story, and he can do whatever he wants. The protagonist awkwardly scratched the back of his head, when suddenly his expression changed to displeased, and he used a beam of flame. Fabio asked where he was and what was wrong with him. Whose voice was that? Carmen asked if he could hear it. Right now a spell was being aimed at him. Did he understand that? If he tried to scream, it would burn his throat. He ordered him not to dare lie to him, otherwise his hand might shake. Alfred removed the bar from his mouth and he asked what his name was. He answered that his name was Fabio. Carmine asked why he decided to escape from the Empire now. Why didn't he do it earlier? Fabio said that he wanted to clear their name first, but the neutral faction that supported him fell apart after the Tanabe alliance gained independence. This country no longer has has a future. The protagonist thought even if he tried to restore his family line in another country, they would all be considered rebels in the empire. He was aware of the risks and wanted to fix the situation within the country first. The protagonist asked why he wanted to clear his family name so much. He survived. Wasn't that enough? Fabio said in fear that they sacrificed themselves so that he could live. They tried to talk, begged for mercy, but nothing worked. One day, soldiers came to them and started killing everyone like pigs. He doesn't know about him, but he can't just continue living without clearing his family's good name. Fabio gritted his teeth in anger and thought, he said it out loud, he's done for anyway. Carmine thought, it doesn't seem like he's lying. He looks like a teenager, an aristocrat in commoner's clothes, bearing the burden of the House of Lambted. He thought it was only about rotten adults, but this guy had a lot of determination. Carmine said that in that case, he would offer him a deal. He would become his assistant. In exchange, when he had enough power as an emperor, he would restore justice to the three families and reveal the truth. Fabio asked in confusion, the emperor? The protagonist asked Alfred to take off his blindfold, and after he saw him, Carmine introduced himself as the 8th Emperor Bungarth. He could be called the direct reason for the existence of the rebellion of the three families. Fabio awkwardly exclaimed that he had never thought of him like that. The protagonist asked why, and he didn't have to be so formal, he could talk like he used to. What was his answer to his offer? Fabio agreed, and Carmine said that right now he couldn't fulfill his part of the deal, but he would definitely do it. He thanked him with tears in his eyes. He can't ignore such a stain on Carl and Philip's reputation. Even without Fabio, he would have revealed the truth. But right now, he is wanted. According to the rules, he should be executed immediately upon discovery. The protagonist called out to Alfred and he asked, did he want something? He replied that he had an order to shelter Fabio and take care of him. If it turns out that Alfred adopted a rebel, then an investigation will begin against him. He will keep an eye on Fabio and become his shackles. Alfred turned away and laughed, saying that he never ceases to amaze him. He will gladly carry out his order. Carmine thought, did he pass another test? And then asked him to keep a good eye on him. Now Fabio will be able to get an education from Alfred, and he will have another servant. Meanwhile, after training, Carmine called out to Alfred and asked how Fabio is. Alfred said that he still had a lot to learn before he would be of any use, but he understood everything immediately, and there was no need to worry about it. Carmine smiled and said, then he was calm. Timon thought he was being driven to death by training every day, but he would remain silent. The protagonist said that the book he read said that members of the royal family drank diluted doses of poisons to develop resistance to it. Could they do that? Alfred asked if he wanted to, but wouldn't the effect be too small? He thought, has he tried it on himself, since he says so? And what about Timon? He said that he tests his food for poisons. The protagonist thought about it, and with a co-ruler there would be no use in this position. He did not think that a taster would help him avoid poisoning. After all, the poisoner would not be an idiot. For example, they have an ingredient that is completely harmless in itself. But if it is mixed with the second component, then together they turn into a deadly poison. One component they send to food, and the second to medicine or something that the taster does not taste. In this case, only he will die, but not the taster. There are many other ways to poison a person unnoticed. Even with a taster at hand, his chances of survival are hardly increased. Having someone nearby who can test his food for poison gives a little confidence. He can understand this. Carl and Philip are not in the capital. Surveillance on him has weakened, and he must take full advantage of this. Carmine called out to Alfred and asked to prepare for him the most common poisons and a couple of those to which it is impossible to develop immunity. Alfred sighed heavily and said that it will be done. Meanwhile, the next week, the protagonist was lying in bed and reading a book. Alfred entered the room, and he called out to him. He quickly returned. Brought samples? He took out a box of poisons, and Carmine said that then they will immediately get down to business. Alfred asked if that would be enough. The protagonist agreed. After all, it was not so easy to tell the difference at a glance. He went to the window and pulled back the curtains. He asked what he was doing. Carmine climbed out the window and said that he wanted to conduct an experiment. But if they did it indoors, it would take them longer. So he wanted to do it outdoors. Thanks to Rosalia, he managed to get a very interesting book. It is called The Theory of Barrier Magic. Among the spells that he can use, there is a barrier spell. A barrier spell is one of the spells related to barrier magic. It was originally created to protect against magical and physical attacks, but it has other uses. The strength and shape of the barrier depends on the amount of mana invested, and you can set conditions. For example, make a barrier that will only let water through. He did about the same thing when he went outside last time. A barrier that lets air through, but does not let odors through. And he had an idea. He can use barrier magic that does not allow poisons to pass through to avoid poisoning. But he immediately encountered a problem. In this world, an image is needed to use magic. He can block a magical blow because he can imagine what it looks like. But in his past life, he was not very interested in poisons, so he has a vague idea about it. It is impossible to imagine protection from poison when he has never seen it. Also, the other day, he learned about enchantment magic, with the help of which he created a flame beam, adding the fire attribute to the heat beam spell, and he was able to do this because he can imagine fire. So he came to the conclusion that the same can be done with barrier magic and poison. First, use a barrier spell that only blocks magic. The protagonist called out to Alfred and asked him to take the weakest poison. Alfred handed it to him and he thanked him and asked him to put it there. Carmine brought his finger with magic to the poison, when suddenly a drop flew out of the bottle and he combined it with the barrier. He smiled and thought it turned out to be a poisonous barrier. Alfred asked in surprise, what is he going to do with this spell? The protagonist asked, he knows that barriers repel each other when they collide. He agreed, and Carmine continued, and now he will create a barrier that will repel the poisonous barrier. So he will create a light image. All you need to do is imagine a barrier that will repel his poisonous barrier. Carmine used the antidote barrier spell, and now the poisonous barrier will block the antidote barrier. Naturally, the antidote barrier also blocks the poisonous barrier. He tried to put the barriers on top of each other, but they repel each other. The point is that the antidote barrier protects him not only from the poisonous barrier, it also protects him from barrier magic and the poison applied. The protagonist asked Alfred to drop the same poison again. He opened the bottle and dripped poison onto the barrier. The protagonist exclaimed happily, it worked. That's what he wanted. The antidote barrier doesn't see the difference between a poison barrier and pure poison. It protects against both. Alfred said that for his age, he has incredible talent and everything is cleverly thought out. The barrier blocks poisons, but how will it help him avoid poisoning? Carmine said that he had already thought of everything. The book wrote about contracting barriers. A counterattack barrier is a barrier to which a predetermined counterattack is added. This is a spell that activates a predetermined counterattack in the event of a fall, and a person can only use 2 to 3 spells at a time. So this barrier is used as a last resort. He is amazed by the ingenuity of the magicians of the past generation. Alfred smiled, and after a while, Carmine thought that instead of a counterattack barrier, he would create a simplified version, a counterattack wall. He will set a counterattack on the barrier, and the activation condition is the contract of the rejected substance with the barrier. The protagonist made the barrier and installed it with the active side down, and then asked Alfred to drop some poison again. He dropped the poison, when suddenly the barrier swelled, and Carmine exclaimed, it worked! The contract is set on the barrier. The poison passes through the counterattack wall, and in fact the gaps between it are too small to be seen. The poison remains as a drop on the surface of the poison barrier, which resists the antidote barrier, and the counterattack wall begins to create a barrier after contact with the poison. The protagonist thought that this is ideal, and a better result could not be imagined. Alfred noted that with this, he does not necessarily need to develop resistance to poisons. If this spell is cast on the esophagus, then he will not be poisoned. He came up with an excellent solution. If his body had resistance to poisons, it would be more difficult for him to conceive an heir. Carmine asked, is this true? He agreed. Even if the child was born healthy, he could have problems in the future, and his son was born blind. The protagonist thought, so he says this from his own experience. He said that his spell is not perfect. Firstly, it is a one-time spell and he will not be able to apply all the poisons to the barrier spell, and to maintain the spell, he needs mana. There are still many things to fix, but for today, he is satisfied. He can't wait to pass the throne to someone else and delve into the study of magic. Alfred called out to him and said that even after he resigns, he will have to deal with state affairs. The main character looked at him in bewilderment.